Chapter 245. The nurse rushed over and gave her a dose of tranquilizer. It was only after she fell asleep that Yun Yeqing thought of Xianxia. He wanted to discuss with her what to do now. However, how could you not see through their intentions? Now that Yun Na was facing the crisis of losing her looks, she naturally wanted to raise money for plastic surgery. This was especially so for Li Qin. She could not wait to squeeze his mommy dry before giving up. In the past, she used to call her a little b***tch. Now that her biological daughter was in trouble, she shamelessly came to talk about being a family. He felt that it was hypocritical. In the past, he used to call her grandma and Yun Yeqing grandpa on account of his mommy. Now that the truth of what happened 6 years ago was out, he would no longer be sentimental. Yu, how can you speak to your grandpa like that? How can you be so rude at such a young age? Li Qin reprimanded him sternly. Grandpa? I won't admit that I have a grandpa. Yu played with the ring in his hand and said calmly, if he's my grandpa, he'll know how hard mommy has been all these years. And you, Li Qin? I used to call you grandma, but you ignored me. For the past 6 years, you didn't care about mommy and me. Why didn't you think that she's your daughter and I'm your grandson back then? Now that you're in trouble, it's too late for you to bring out your so-called familial love. Yun Yeqing's body stiffened. His face was livid. All these years, he had not fulfilled his responsibility as a father. He felt that he owed this daughter of his. However, Yu's attitude toward him was too different. He could not figure out what was going on. Li Qin was displeased and lost her patience. You can't say that. What did the Yun family not treat her well? Even if they neglected her, it's just a small conflict. Blood is thicker than water. No matter what, your grandpa is still your biological grandfather, isn't he? As if he had heard something funny, Yu suddenly sneered and said coldly, blood is thicker than water? Do you really think I don't know that mommy isn't your biological daughter? Yun Yeqing was stunned. How did he know? As for Yun Xiaxia's identity as an adopted daughter, no one had ever mentioned it to him. How could a child like him know about it? Could it be impossible? He knew his daughter Xianxia very well. She had always treated him as her biological father. This daughter of hers had always been very filial. Sure. Since you already know that your mother isn't our biological daughter, shouldn't you be the one to repay the kindness of raising her? Li Qin tried her best, pointing at him and accusing him without holding back, as if she had forgotten that the person in front of her was merely a 6-year-old child. Repay. Yu suddenly got up from her seat and took out a thick stack of documents from the study room. She threw it at Yun Yeqing expressionlessly, her tone as cold as ice. My mommy helped the Yun family once 6 years ago. Li Qin, what do you take my mommy for? Even if you want to humiliate her, Yun Tianyu, won't allow it. Turning around, he sneered. At the same time, Mr. Yun, I kindly advise you and your wife to keep your mouths shut and not talk nonsense to my mommy. You're not to mention today's matter to anyone. Li Qin fumed. You? How can you say that? Scram. Yu suddenly pointed at the door and coldly ordered, scram. Yun Yeqing turned around and left. Seeing this, Li Qin hurriedly followed after him. Yu's face was cold. Thinking of the price his mother had paid for the Yun family 6 years ago, her heart ached so much that she was about to suffocate. Her heart really hurt as if it were being pierced. Yu supported herself on the sofa and clutched her chest tightly with one hand. Suddenly, she found it difficult to breathe. Suffocation. It really felt like suffocation. Cold sweat seeped out of his forehead. Yu's body stiffly sat down on the sofa, and his breathing became more and more rapid. He clutched his chest, feeling as if something was blocking his heart. It was so stuffy and painful that he could hardly breathe. Yu painfully curled into a ball on the sofa. Her fingers clutched her chest tightly and her eyebrows were contorted. Her whole face was pale and colorless from the pain. Bean-sized beads of cold sweat rolled down her face and dripped onto the sofa. His phone suddenly rang. Yu looked in the direction of the ringtone. Clutching his chest, he forced himself to sit up on the sofa. Slowly, almost step by step, he moved his feet. Just as his feet touched the ground, his body swayed, and he fell from the sofa to the floor. Breathe. I can't breathe. He struggled to move to the table, but the ringtone was already cut off. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. In less than 2 seconds, the call was connected and Li Hanlin's calm voice came through. Director Yun? Director, please save me, smack. Before he could finish his words, the phone fell to the floor. Yun Tianyu could no longer hold on. His face turned pale as he fell to the floor. The corner of his lips twitched, and he lost consciousness. Li Hanlin's anxious voice came through the phone. Yu. Yun Tianyu? Hang in there, I'm coming. Sitting in the car on the way back to the hospital, Yun Yeqing opened the document with trembling hands. He quietly browsed through it page by page. His face became increasingly solemn and gradually turned ashen. Li Qin, who was sitting at the side, trembled with fear. She wanted to poke her head out a few times, but due to the dim lighting in the car and her poor eyesight, she could not see clearly what it was. Thus she asked, "Hubby, what exactly is this? Don't talk to me." Yun Yeqing suddenly interrupted her angrily. With a heavy frown, he leaned his head against the seat. "Don't talk to me, Li Qin. Don't talk to me." Chapter 246. As the Aston Martin sped along, the shadows of the lush trees flashed by outside the window. The villa was located in the elegant Xianxia garden. There were towering mountains, small streams, and lush green forests. At a glance, it looked like a sea of greenery. The night breeze blew, stirring up the green waves. Under the moonlight, the scenery was enchanting. Alas, at this moment, Xianxia, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, looked ahead nervously. From the corner of her eye, she cautiously glanced at the tachometer. The needle was pointing at 4,500. She then looked at the speed of 180 kilometers per hour. Her heart was in her throat at once. Fast. The high-performance sports car was like a runaway horse, roaring as it sped along the mountain road, as if it was going to tear apart the silent night. Even though she didn't understand sports cars and didn't know what a 4,500 speed meant, she didn't feel much at first. However, at that speed she could feel how scary it was when it was cornering. At that moment, she felt as if the car would float in the next second if it went any faster. When they left the villa, they had to go through a long mountain road. There was only a railing on the side of the road, and below the railing was a cliff. If they hit the railing, the consequences would be unimaginable. Even though the railing looked sturdy, it would be weak under the impact of the sports car. It was as if it didn't exist and existed in name only. If the car lost control, not to mention the railing, even the surrounding walls would collapse. She could even imagine that if the car lost control, it would crash through the railing and crash into the cliff, just like in American blockbusters. With a loud explosion, the car would really be destroyed and the people inside would die. "Muyaja, it's too fast," Yun Shirshir said to the man anxiously as she clutched her thumping heart. She looked at him, but at that moment, the man was supporting his head with one hand and looking ahead indifferently. He seemed to be indifferent. The scenery outside the window flashed by. Under the moonlight, his handsome face didn't have any fluctuations in expression. He only had one hand on the steering wheel, looking calm and at ease, as if he was handling everything with ease. "Muyaja." Just as she finished speaking, the man glanced at her from the corner of his eye and smiled playfully. Suddenly, he stepped on the accelerator and the engine let out an ambitious roar as it sped up. What she didn't know was that to him, let alone 180 yards, even 200 yards was completely within his control. There was a curve in front of them. On the left was a mountain wall filled with strange rocks, while on the right was a bottomless cliff. On the mountain road, the streamlined sports car made a beautiful and smooth turn. Under the moonlight, the bright silver body of the car outlined a dazzling silver line. Yun Shirshir was so frightened that she cried out involuntarily. Her face suddenly broke out in a thick layer of cold sweat. She was so scared that there was not a trace of blood on her face. Did this man do it on purpose? When the car slowly drove into Yun Shirshir's residence, her face was already pale. The car was parked downstairs and the engine was turned off. Muyaja unbuckled his seatbelt and leaned closer to her, his voice full of ridicule. "What? Are you scared stiff? As he spoke, he stretched out his slender fingers and gently flicked her cold cheeks in a somewhat naughty manner. Xianxia came back to her senses and looked over. She glared at him fiercely and asked suspiciously, Wuxia, did you do it on purpose? Chapter 247. On purpose? What do you mean on purpose? He asked while knowing the answer. His lips curled into a wicked arc. Although his tone was innocent, his eyes revealed a satisfied smile. He felt that her frightened appearance was quite cute. Some women not only had beautiful facial features, but their eyes were even more seductive and charming. Even if she was angrily glaring at you, you would still have the illusion that she was acting coquettishly and seducing you. It was extremely charming. His pupils slightly congealed, as if he had been bewitched by her delicate appearance, and he couldn't help but reach out to touch her face with his fingertips. Xianxia coldly avoided him and slapped his hand away. She angrily said, Why are you still pretending to be innocent? Why are you driving so fast? Don't you know that this is very dangerous? Wuxia slightly knitted his brows and pretended to be wronged as he asked back, It was clearly you who kept rushing me. I saw that you were in a rush, so I drove so fast. His mouth moved as he pushed all the blame onto her. The man looked at her with an innocent face. His tone and tone were natural, as if he was silently accusing her of being unreasonable. If anyone else saw this, especially his close subordinates, they would definitely be shocked by his expression at this moment. The president, who was always cold and indifferent, had his brows slightly knitted. His thin lips were slightly pursed and his face was filled with innocence. His pair of eyes hid a smile that couldn't be seen. They would definitely be shocked to the point of being dumbfounded. In their eyes, Wuxia was arrogant and cold. He didn't smile normally, and his cold face seemed like it would never have any expression. He also wouldn't be affected by any emotions. His face was originally handsome, but he always had a cold expression that made it hard for people to get close to him. Other than the little young master, he wouldn't smile to anyone else. But now, he actually smiled to a woman. However, Xianxia naturally didn't have any awareness. She also didn't feel that he was taking special care of her. She only felt that this man was quite evil. He actually joked about such a dangerous matter. Isn't your speed a little too fast? From the villa in the suburbs, through the continuous mountain roads, through the bustling city, from the manor to her house, the distance of more than 50 kilometers, he actually only used 20 minutes. One had to know. The traffic in the capital was extremely congested. Just driving in the city took 15 minutes, which was more than 30 kilometers of mountain roads. He only used 5 minutes? What kind of concept was this? The fastest train on the high-speed railway was only 493 kilometers per hour. Later, because of an accident, it had to be reduced to 300 kilometers per hour. At 400 kilometers per hour, her ears almost lost their ringing. Even until now, she still hadn't recovered from the ringing. Xianxia didn't want to talk to him. She pushed the car door open and she almost tripped. She was secretly annoyed. She hated herself for not being able to live up to her expectations. She was actually frightened by his driving skills to the point that her legs went soft. But this couldn't blame her. She was in that moment. Did this man's driving skills have to be so terrifying? She raised her wrist to look at her watch. It was already very late. You should be asleep, right? Chapter 248. Yu did not have a father by her side since she was young, so she vowed to work hard to make up for this. After she started working, no matter how busy she was or how late she had to work overtime, she would always make time for dinner. Even if she had to take leave, she would rush home to have dinner with him before rushing back to the office to continue working overtime. Even though this behavior had caused a lot of dissatisfaction, she had never made an exception. Unless there was something special, she would also take leave from him in advance. Even if the little guy would protest and express his dissatisfaction, he would at most tell her to eat on time and go home early over the phone. However, it was rare for her to not return home at night. Last time was the first time. Last night was the second time. Today was the third time. For 2 consecutive days, she did not have dinner with him. Xianxia was very vexed. She raised her head and looked at the window of her house. The lights were still on. Her heart warmed, but at the same time, it ached slightly. This little guy, did he deliberately turn on the lights and wait for her to go home? Xianxia was about to go upstairs when the man behind her called out to her. Are you leaving just like that? Wuxia saw that she intended to go upstairs without him, and a trace of dissatisfaction appeared on his face. What else do you want? Xianxia turned to glare at him. Don't you have anything to say? Wuxia looked at her. Under the moonlight, his deep-set eyes shone slightly. I want to go home. Xianxia turned around and swiped the door open. What he got in response was the heavy sound of the door closing in the corridor. Wuxia sat in the car and could not help but smile. He raised his eyes slightly and looked at the only window on the 10th floor that was still lit. A trace of contemplation flashed across his eyes. Xianxia is my Yuntianyo's mommy. She is the woman I will protect for the rest of my life. I won't allow you to let her suffer any grievances, let alone make her sad. The young yet mature voice of a child echoed in her ears. Immature and mature were two contradictory words, but they were perfectly reflected in little Munchkin. What was immature was his voice, his appearance, and his still delicate and thin body. He was clearly only 6 years old, but his face was still childish and his voice was full of childishness. What was mature was her arrogant boldness, her steady tone, and her calm words. He was unable to understand why such a mature soul was hidden in such a petite body. He was so mature that it surprised him. He got out of the car, took out a cigarette box and lit it in his mouth. Accompanied by a glimmer of sparks, the unique smell of cigarettes drifted in the evening breeze. Xianxia opened the door and was welcomed by the warm light from the living room. A smile involuntarily appeared on her face as she walked into the living room and said guiltily, "You, mommy is back." There was no response for a long time after she said this. If it were in the past, there would be hurried footsteps from the study. Yu would appear at the entrance with a bright smile on his face. He would jump into her arms and rub his tender little face against her like a spoiled little mommy. Now, it was so quiet that it was almost strange. Asleep? She walked into the study with confusion in her heart. The computer screen and fax machine were on, but the little guy was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 249. Xianxia exclaimed in surprise and walked into the bedroom. She even crept under the bed to take a look. Was he playing hide and seek with her to scare her as a punishment for not returning home for 2 days? Alas, he was nowhere to be found. She was suddenly worried. She hurried to the balcony and fearfully held onto the railing as she looked down. Her heart only calmed down when she saw that there was nothing out of the ordinary. Her phone had been smashed, so it was inevitable that she would be worried. She could not find the little lad anywhere. The house was only so big. There were 2 bedrooms and a living room, and the layout was about 60 square meters. She searched every corner of the house. There was no one in the house, though. Xianxia was extremely worried. She returned to the living room and saw the phone on the floor at the corner of the table. She walked over to pick it up and realized that the phone had been replaced with a smartphone. She was feeling perplexed when she saw a note left on the table. She picked it up and saw a phone number left on it. Xianxia had an ominous feeling. She picked up Yu's phone and dialed the number with trembling fingers. Li Hanlin's steady yet anxious voice came from the other end. Are you Yu's mommy? Since it was Yu's phone, there was a caller ID. I am. You are. I'm Director Yun Cuff. Li Hanlin paused for a moment before continuing. I'm the principal of this kindergarten, Madam Yun. We've met before. Hello, Principal Li. May I ask, are you? Xianxia did not know what was going on, but she heard Li Hanlin say in a heavy tone, Madam Yun, Yun Tianyu has always been in poor health. Does he have a congenital heart deficiency? Xianxia seemed to have expected something when she heard his words. Her heart clenched and her voice trembled uncontrollably. Principal, what happened to Yu? When I got home, I didn't see him at home. There was a note for you on the table. He's in the hospital now. Not long ago, he called me and said that he was feeling unwell. I rushed over and sent him to the hospital. Li Hanlin paused, then suddenly said seriously, Madam Yun, I have to criticize you. As a parent, as a mother, how can you leave your child alone at home? Although Yun Tianyu is usually very obedient and mature, he is still only a 6-year-old child. He is still so young. Can you be at ease leaving him alone at home? Children were naturally ignorant and lacked common sense about safety. This time, it was a relapse, but what about the next time? Many parents left their children at home out of negligence. Their children were playful and accidentally fell off the balcony and got seriously injured. The media leaked that they were poisoned. Were there any lack of such tragedies? You should reflect on yourself. Xianxia was worried sick. When she heard Li Hanlin's reproachful tone, her eyes welled up with tears. She also blamed herself immensely. Yes, Yu was only 6 years old. How could she leave him alone at home? His health was not good to begin with, so she should take good care of him. However, she was so irresponsible. Not only did she leave him at home for a day and a night, but she did not even fulfill the most basic responsibility of a mother when the child was hospitalized because of his illness. What cocktail party? She should not have attended it. What alcohol? She clearly knew her alcohol tolerance, so why did she have to be so stubborn? She should not have drunk. Not to mention a glass, she should not have even taken a sip. Chapter 250. She covered her mouth and asked anxiously with reddened eyes, "I'm sorry, Principal. It's all my fault. Where's Yu? Which hospital is he at? I'll be there right away." "But I'm at public hospital number 1. Hurry over. Yu's condition isn't looking good. He has respiratory problems and hasn't woken up yet. Anyway, be careful on the road. I'll take good care of him." Before he could finish, Xianxia hurriedly picked up her bag, locked the door, and rushed downstairs. Downstairs, Wuxia was about to start the car when he saw Xianxia rushing out of the car through the rearview mirror. She looked flustered as she ran towards the main entrance. With a strange feeling in his heart, he pressed the horn twice. The car's horn was exceptionally loud and immediately attracted Xianxia's attention. Seeing that it was his car, she rushed over without a care. The moment the car door opened, she said anxiously, "Wuxia, send me to public hospital number 1. "Why are you going to the hospital?" Wuxia asked curiously. Xianxia's shoulders were trembling. She clutched her bag tightly and her face was filled with self-blame and anxiety. She looked so flustered that she looked like she was about to be defeated. "Yu is at the hospital. I have to rush over immediately. Right away, right away." Wuxia heard this and furrowed his brows slightly. However, he didn't ask further and leaned over. She thought that he was going to do something and wanted to stop him. However, he merely leaned over and buckled her seatbelt. "Don't be afraid. I'm here," he said softly and started the car. He stepped on the accelerator and the car sped out of the main entrance. Xianxia looked at the man's side profile in shock. However, she saw that his handsome face was cold and tense. His expression was calm and there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. However, he wasn't flustered either as he looked straight ahead. Although she was anxious at this moment, she didn't know why, but she didn't panic like before. The words, "Don't be afraid, I'm here," seemed to brush away the uneasiness and fear in her heart. However, when she thought of Yu's painful appearance when he was young, her heart clenched tightly again. At this moment, in the hospital ward, Li Hanlin sat on a small stool at the head of the bed and put down his phone. On the hospital bed, Yu, who he said was not awake yet and not in a good condition, was sitting quietly on the bed with a newspaper in her hands. Seeing that he had hung up on fairy tale, she put down the newspaper and crossed her arms. She leaned against the headboard and looked at him with a serious expression. She blinked her big black eyes and saw that he had put down his phone. She quickly asked, "What did you say?" "He hung up. He's probably on his way here." Li Hanlin asked again, "Su Yun, what did I say just now?" "There's no problem ahead. Didn't you tell her to be careful on the road?" Yun Tianyu reprimanded. "What if Mommy was in a panic and met with danger on the way here?" Li Hanlin's face fell with grievance. "I did, but I was afraid that she didn't hear me, so I called back, but no one picked up." Yun Tianyu crossed his arms and nodded solemnly. He calmly listed out rows of formulas in his mind. It was a 30-kilometer journey from the apartment to the public hospital. The subway was at the entrance and the bus stop was a few dozen meters away. There was no need to transfer. The last train was at 9 p.m. She couldn't make it. The bus was too slow, so Mommy must have chosen to take a taxi. It would take about 45 minutes. Chapter 251. Li Hanlin's eyes twitched. This child, he was so scheming. He was exasperated. Earlier, he had received a call from Little Munchkin and heard Little Munchkin's painful cries for help. He immediately put down everything he was doing and rushed over. When he opened the door, he saw Little Munchkin lying on the ground. He immediately rushed over and carried him up. Seeing that Little Munchkin had fainted, he didn't know what was going on. He pinched Little Munchkin's philtrum and was about to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation when Little Munchkin opened his eyes. As soon as he woke up, he slapped his face to the side. Disgusting! Just as Li Hanlin was feeling extremely wronged, he saw the little boy leaning weakly in his arms. His breathing was rapid and his face was flushed red. He quickly asked what was going on. He immediately pointed to the medicine box on the cabinet and said, Bring it over." Li Hanlin immediately brought the medicine box over. The little boy struggled to find the medicine bottle and took a pill. However, his symptoms did not improve. He hurriedly sent him to the public hospital. After emergency treatment, his condition was finally alleviated. However, his following request left him dumbfounded. "Later, if my mommy calls you, please make my condition sound more serious." Li Hanlin's eyes widened when he heard this. "President Yun, don't you love your mommy the most? Aren't you afraid that she will be worried? Shouldn't she be worried about me?" Yu retorted unhappily. He was speechless. Li Hanlin pondered for a long time. It seemed that his words made sense. She left me alone at home for a day and a night. Shouldn't she blame herself and reflect on herself? Yes, so, just once will be enough. Let her love me more. As Yu spoke, he lowered his head and gripped the corner of the blanket tightly. His furrowed brows made his back view look helpless. Only when one has lost something will they know how to cherish it. However, once you lose it, you can never get it back. That was how the phone call came to be. He had always doted on his mommy, no matter how big or small the matter was. As long as she could take care of herself, he would never ask too much of this stupid mommy. He only asked her to take care of herself so that he would be at ease. However, he realized that sometimes he would rather be a little more vulnerable and rely on her a little more. Only then would mommy's thoughts be more focused on him. "Oh," Yu nodded and frowned. "I don't think it's serious enough. What's not good? You shouldn't say that." He was silent for a moment, his eyes cold. Suddenly he said, "You should say that I almost died." Yun Tianyou's sinister smile sent a chill down Li Hanlin's spine. This child was truly unfathomable. Was he really only 6 years old? However, his words were not an exaggeration. If he had not arrived in time, Yun Tianyou's condition would have worsened, and it would have been very dangerous. Li Hanlin understood that the reason why he had asked him to say this was just a means. A child's world was extremely simple. They did not know how to beat around the bush or how to use tricks. Although Yun Tianyu was considered outstanding among the children, his outstanding EQ and IQ were unattainable by the other children. However, deep down, he was also incomparably simple. He only knew that if he appeared a little more vulnerable and pitiful, his mommy would show more love and care for him. Yun Tianyu slowly lay down and said in a low voice, "I can't lose to that man. I must get mommy's heart back." Chapter 252. The car stopped at the entrance of the hospital. Yun Shishir hurriedly alighted from the car and jogged toward the inpatient department. Mu Yaja parked the car and quickly chased after her. When she entered the inpatient department, she quickly took out her phone to call Li Hanlin, only to realize that her phone was out of battery. Yun Shishir bit her lower lip in frustration. She had been careless and did not bring the note with the number with her. She did not even know which floor and ward Yu was in, so she could only bite the bullet and walk toward the nurse's desk. She was halfway there when someone called out to her from behind. "Yun Shishir, you're here." Yun Shishir turned around in surprise and saw Li Qin, who was standing behind her, looking at her in surprise. Her face stiffened and she was a little surprised. Why was she here? Xianxia asked curiously, "Why are you here?" "The child is in the hospital. I just rushed over. Have you heard about this too?" For some reason, Li Qin's tone toward her was very polite. She was no longer as sarcastic as before. With a smile on her face, her tone was very gentle. Li Qin was not like this in the past. Whenever she saw her, she would look mean and speak with a sharp tone. She could not get used to the stark contrast now. The child was injured? Yu? Could it be that Principal Li contacted her father and the rest to inform them to pay the hospital fees? That should be it. When Yun Tianyou's illness flared up, the principal did not contact her when he sent the child to the hospital. He should have contacted Yun Yeqing immediately. She remembered that, just in case, she had filled in Yun Yeqing's emergency contact number in the school's contact book. Principal Li was not related to her family in any way. When the child was injured, he rushed to the hospital immediately. They were already very grateful. How could they expect him to pay the hospital fees for free? Principal Li must have contacted Yun Yeqing. When he learned that something had happened to Yu, he rushed over and paid the hospital fees for the child. However, Li Qin's attitude made her feel strange. In the past, she had always been annoyed with Yun Tianyu. Why now, did you also just rush over? Xianxia asked. Yes, your dad is here too, but he just went to pay the bill. She didn't have much money on her, but she needed money to treat her child's illness. She could only save whatever money she had on her. If it's not enough, we'll think of another way. As Li Qin spoke, her face was filled with sorrow. She and Yun Yeqing had taken out all the savings they had in the bank, but even then, they only had 10,000 yuan in their bank account. Although someone had already paid for Yun Na's medical bills, the doctor said that the money was not enough for further treatment. He wanted them to pay another 20,000 yuan. But where did he get so much money? When Yun Yeqing found out that she had forced Xianxia to be a surrogate, he flew into a rage and threatened to divorce her. Divorce? How could this be? What would she do if they got divorced? Where's Yun Na? At this critical juncture, Li Qin was terrified. Divorce? How could this be? In her heart, she knew that her husband was down and out. He was a pauper with no money and could not give her a luxurious life. However, if he were to divorce her now, what should she do? She was used to living the life of a rich lady. She did not have to worry about food and clothing and did not have to do household chores. Even when the Yun family was in dire straits, she rarely did any housework. Most of it was done by Xianxia and Yun Yeqing. Chapter 253. Even if they were to get a divorce, it could not be now. Now that Yun Na was in such a predicament, she was still counting on Yun Yeqing to find a way to raise money for her to undergo plastic surgery. It would not be too late to kick him out then, but it could not be now. Besides, she was still counting on Xianxia to bear some of the medical bills for them. Hence, when she saw her, her face was full of flattery. Li Qin also thought that Xianxia had rushed over to visit after hearing about this matter from Yun Tianyu. She only hoped that the latter would be magnanimous and pay for Yun Na's plastic surgery fees. Xianxia, on the other hand, clearly misunderstood. She thought that Li Qin had rushed over to visit Yu out of goodwill and paid for his hospitalization fees. She could not help but sigh inwardly. Sigh. This child is so pitiful. Her voice is hoarse from crying. My heart aches to see her like this. The doctor asked for 20,000 yuan, but your father and I only managed to scrape together less than 10,000 yuan after half a day of hard work. This is a time of worry. Don't worry, I brought the money. Which ward is he in? Xianxia asked anxiously when she thought of Yu. You brought the money? That's great. Li Qin immediately pulled her hand and led her into the elevator. When the elevator reached the 8th floor, Li Qin hurriedly led her to Ward 5020. Xianxia was also anxious, but when she walked into the ward and saw the person lying on the bed with a bandage on her face, her expression froze. It was just that, at this moment, the person was half awake and half asleep. Lying on the bed, there was no reaction. What's going on? She asked immediately. She thought that Li Qin had rushed over because she knew that Yu was sick. Sigh. I don't know what's going on either. It would have been better if she did not mention it, But the moment she asked, Li Qin immediately burst into tears. I received a call early this morning saying that something happened to Nana. Your father and I rushed to the hospital and saw her like this. Your father's heart ached so much that he cried behind my back. Yun Shishi's expression became more and more unsightly. She looked at Yun Na on the hospital bed with a complicated expression. Li Qin was still crying at the side and said, the doctor said that this child's face was cut several times and had to be stitched up with dozens of stitches. It seemed like it was cut by a blade. Some of the wounds were shallow, while others were very deep. There were several slashes. Wasn't this a deliberate attempt to harm others? The doctor said that the child's face was ruined. However, if they could gather enough money, they could go to a beauty clinic for plastic surgery. Perhaps they could recover their looks. Shishi, can you think of something? Yun Shishi was stunned, but her heart turned cold. She thought that Li Qin had some kind intentions. When she was young, she had a high fever and was hospitalized with pneumonia, but Li Qin had never once visited her. How much would she care about Yu when he was sick? Think of something? It's like this. Li Qin pulled her to the side. Her face was polite, and her tone was rare and gentle. Nana's face is disfigured, but the doctor said that if we could gather $500,000, we could get plastic surgery to recover her looks. You know that Nana has always been very vain. When she woke up and found out that she was disfigured, she tried to kill herself. Your father's heart ached and he blamed himself. Can you think of a way to gather $500,000? 500,000? Where do I get $500,000? Yun Shishi interrupted her. Her face turned even colder. Chapter 254. It was no wonder that Li Qin no longer mocked and ridiculed her when she saw her. It turned out that she was hoping that she would raise money for her daughter's plastic surgery. Even though she didn't know what had happened to Yun Na that caused her face to be slashed dozens of times for no reason, didn't she go straight home after leaving the cocktail party yesterday? But so what? Whether or not she was disfigured, whether or not she could be saved, to put it bluntly, even if she died, it had nothing to do with her. Li Qin usually called her a little b*tch, but once she realized that she still had some value, she would stick to her. Was she trying to squeeze every last bit of value out of her? She wouldn't be foolish again. Sure. Li Qin saw that her attitude was cold, and her face turned stiff. She was about to flare up, but when she remembered that all her hopes were pinned on her, she could only swallow her anger and say calmly, "You can't be so heartless. Could it be that you're so heartless as to watch your own sister commit suicide?" What do you mean by that? Yun Shishi smiled mockingly. I didn't cause her to be like this. Are you trying to push the blame to me? That's not what I meant. How can you criticize me like that? Li Qin was also anxious. Moreover, I didn't ask for too much. The doctor said it's 500,000. It's only 500,000. To you, it should be a small amount, right? 500,000? You just said a few words, and I have to give you so much money? Yun Shishi suppressed the anger in her heart. I don't have it. You have it. Li Qin raised her voice. Why don't you have it? A few days ago, I saw you carrying an Armani handbag. That brand easily costs hundreds of thousands, and the more expensive ones are in the millions. You're telling me that you don't have money? Are you really so heartless as to leave her in the lurch? I was. Yun Shishi frowned. When she heard Li Qin mention the gown, she felt gloomy. She wanted to explain, but on second thought, there was no point in saying so much to her. Hence, she rejected her with one sentence. I don't have money. You're so heartless. In any case, you should at least consider your father's kindness in raising you. Now that your sister is in such a miserable state, can't you do some good and think of a way to save her? Li Qin said bitterly. Suddenly, she said, to be able to afford such expensive clothes, you must have a big boss supporting you outside. As soon as he finished speaking, Yun Shishi's face immediately turned pale. She actually said such unpleasant words with such a relaxed expression. There was more than one bed in this ward. The family members of the other patients were also present. They all looked at her curiously. Li Qin's words were straightforward, but her meaning was shallow. She was simply saying that since she could afford to wear Armani, she must have a sugar daddy outside. But with so many people present, she didn't care at all. For a moment, everyone in the ward, including the patients and their family members, stared at her with colored glasses. From time to time, they would point at her, shake their heads, and sigh. When they saw Xianxia walk into the ward, they were amazed. This girl was really fresh and beautiful. But they didn't expect that such a beautiful girl was actually a kept mistress. As a result, those gazes that were either filled with amazement or admiration turned into contempt and disdain. Chapter 255. Although she never cared about how others looked at her. What she hated was why Li Qin was always so harsh with her words. I didn't. Li Qin scolded. You didn't? Don't try to hide it from me. The neighbors told me that you left in a Bentley that day. Don't tell me that you bought the car yourself. Xianxia was shocked. On the day of the cocktail party, Gu Xingzi did drive a Bentley when he came to pick her up. The Bentley drove into the neighborhood. At that time, all the neighbors saw her get in the car, but they didn't know that she got in the car to attend a cocktail party. They only thought that she had a man outside, and with that kind of dirty identity. Often, outsiders only saw your glamorous appearance. Out of jealousy and envy, they would make malicious speculations about you and point fingers at you. Hence, when this matter reached Li Qin's ears, she really thought that Xianxia had an impressive sugar daddy and believed it without a doubt. But where did she get this sugar daddy from? Where was she going to get this 500,000 yuan? When Li Qin asked for money, it was just a simple matter of words. Did she have to hand over so much money to her? Otherwise, she would be unfilial. Xianxia suddenly felt that she didn't even have the strength to explain. It seemed superfluous, so she just kept quiet. Li Qin saw that she didn't say anything and that she couldn't get anything right. Hence, she turned to the other family members on the hospital beds and muttered pitifully, Hey, why didn't you say anything after I spoke for so long? Seriously, was it a sin in my past life to have such a heartless daughter like you? Xianxia was expressionless. Her face was cold and ugly. The family members couldn't stand it anymore. They stood up and criticized Xianxia with righteous indignation. Young lady, this is your fault. We're all family. The more difficult it is, the more you should help each other, right? Moreover, she's your mother. Your mother is begging you, but you're indifferent and cold. I've never seen someone as unfilial as you. That's right, the one lying on the bed isn't just anyone, it's your sister. How can you be so heartless? At the side, several patients lying on the hospital beds also complained. If I had such a daughter, I would rather throw her away when she was born than raise her. When she grows up, won't she still cause trouble for me? Xianxia's shoulders trembled. Younger sister. Yes, she was her younger sister. Ever since she was young, she had always doted on her. If Yunna liked clothes, even if she had to scrimp and save, she would still buy her a set of clothes with her pocket money. At that time, the iPhone was all the rage. It cost a few thousand yuan. She gritted her teeth and used the money she earned from her part-time job to buy it for her. Did she not treat her sister well? But what did this younger sister do to her? Seeing that someone had stood up for her, Li Qin appeared to be in the right. However, she looked aggrieved and helpless. You guys don't know. She's not my biological daughter. My husband and I adopted her. She's been estranged from me since she was young. Adopted? When everyone heard this, they were shocked. Then, everyone was furious. What an ingrate! I was wondering how can a biological daughter be so heartless? So, she's adopted? This is too much. You don't know how to be grateful at all. If your mother didn't adopt you, would you have the happy life you have today? Why don't you think about whose blessing it was that you were able to grow up to this age? Xianxia finally understood what it felt like to be unable to explain herself. At that moment, she was worried about Yu. She was anxious and turned to leave. Seeing that she was about to leave, Li Qin immediately walked up to her and grabbed her arm. Xianxia was annoyed and pushed her away. Li Qin fell to the ground, opened her throat, and started to cry. You're hitting me. I was just pulling your hand. Stop pretending. Xianxia said angrily. Yu is in critical condition now. I don't have the time to care about your nonsense. After saying that, she turned to leave. However, she was blocked by a group of nosy family members at the door. Where do you think you're going? Unfilial daughter, how can there be someone as heartless as you? Are you hitting me? Chapter 256. One of the women's tone was especially harsh, as if she had already taken Li Qin's place. She was so angry that her face turned red. She spoke up for Li Qin. If it were me, I would definitely be angered to death by an unfilial daughter like you. That's right. Everyone says that daughters are considerate and are their mother's little jacket, but this is the first time I've seen someone as heartless as you. Xianxia clenched her teeth and held back the tears in her eyes. Suddenly, she raised her head and asked, "Are you done?" Her voice was not loud, but it was full of confidence with a hint of bone-chilling coldness. For a moment, the ward fell silent. Everyone stared at her, either angry or surprised. They did not understand and only thought that she was hopeless. However, they saw her take a deep breath and say to everyone, "What right do you have to criticize me? Little girl, you're quite fierce, aren't you?" Xianxia did not back down and said, "Did I scold you or glare at you? You've been speculating about me from the beginning, haven't you?" Everyone was speechless and fell silent. Xianxia said again, "Do you know me? Do you know how I've been living for the past 20 years? Do you know what I've been through? Do you know what I've been through? You don't know anything, but you act like you do. This is our family matter. Who are you to butt in?" We didn't say anything. We just think that a girl who's so young doesn't learn good things at such a young age and hooks up with rich businessmen outside. That's right. Shameless, breaking into other people's families and not learning good things. People like you are the scum of society. Li Qin said, "Don't say any more. I've lost all my face. Sigh, adopted children are not as close as biological children. There's nothing we can do about it. It's one thing to be filial, but it's another thing to be immoral. She's such a young girl. Why did she have to learn to be a mistress?" Xianxia stood alone in the whirlpool of public opinion. Among the crowd, her back view looked a little lonely. However, just as everyone was condemning her, a man's elegant voice interrupted them. "Mistress?" Everyone turned their heads and saw a slender, mature man leaning against the door with a cold expression. His face was as handsome as a god, but there was a faint displeasure written on it. When Xianxia saw him, she couldn't help but feel embarrassed. She lowered her head and looked embarrassed. Yunna also opened her eyes. In fact, she had been awake for a long time. She was just pretending to be asleep. She was in a depressed mood. The wound on her face was inflamed, swollen, and painful. Now that Xianxia was unwilling to take out money to treat her face, she became even more angry. However, she was secretly pleased to hear that everyone was helping Li Qin to criticize Xianxia, despite not knowing the facts. A man's cold voice woke her up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Wuxia standing at the door. Wuxia? The CEO of Mu Group? Why was he here? When Li Qin saw him, she was petrified as if she had been struck by lightning. Yunna did not recognize him. She had sharp eyes. She did not know who this man in front of her was, but she noticed that this man's facial features were similar to Yun Tianyou's. Although they were similar, it was more than that. That pair of eyes, that high nose bridge, and that good-looking thin lips were exactly the same. Chapter 257. Could he really be the child's biological father? Li Qin was stunned. She scrutinized the handsome man in front of her. Armani's handmade shirt, tailored slim-fit trousers, expensive leather shoes, and an expensive watch on his wrist. Unlike those nouveau riche, this man exuded the aura of a true aristocrat. With one look, one could tell that he was from a prestigious family and was either rich or respectable. Li Qin was so shocked that her eyeballs were about to pop out. She knew that Yun Tianyou's biological father was a rich man. Such a generous remuneration was not something an ordinary rich man could afford. However, she did not expect this employer to be so handsome. Moreover, he looked very young, about 25 or 26 years old. Could it be that he was not married yet? If that was the case, then she regretted it a little. If she had known earlier, then back then, Would she not have let Xianxia off so easily? Li Qin clenched her fists as a flame of jealousy rose in her heart. Back then, Yun Yeqing had a pretentious relationship with the deputy director of a private hospital under Disheng Financial Group due to business reasons. Li Qin used this opportunity to learn from the deputy director that the Mu family was secretly looking for a surrogate mother. Although the conditions were harsh, the remuneration was very generous. Hence, she had an idea about Xianxia. At that time, Xianxia was only 18 years old. She was as beautiful as a lotus in clear water and was very outstanding. Hence, under repeated pressure, she brought Xianxia to sign the contract. She even gloated over her employer's misfortune, thinking that he would be an ugly and obese middle-aged man. She was overjoyed at the thought of the B***starred she hated the most being trampled on by a fierce-looking man. However, now that she saw it, it was undoubtedly a ruthless slap to her face. If only she had known earlier, she would have let Yun Na do it. Perhaps, if that child had worked harder, she would have become a phoenix and become the Mu family's young mistress. When that time came, she would not have to suffer and worry like this. Not only Li Qin, but everyone in the ward was stunned. They had never seen such a handsome man. His face, which seemed to have been cast by a knife, was cold. It was as if his entire body was emitting a golden light. His every movement could not hide his noble aura. Mu Yaja slowly walked in and walked behind the woman standing in front of the bed. He reached out and stroked Xianxia's hair. "Why didn't you wait for me?" He lowered his head, and there was a trace of tenderness in his eyes, as if the winter snow would melt. As a result, Xianxia's originally cold heart warmed up a little. The man's gentleness made her a little uncomfortable. I stopped the car just now, so I'm late." Xianxia said faintly, "It's fine." "Did you suffer when I was not around?" After a pause, Mu Yaja raised his head and his expression darkened. "When I was at the door just now, I think I heard someone call you a mistress." He looked up and scanned the ward with his cold gaze. His gaze landed on the family members of the patients. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, and his voice was as cold as an icicle. "Who said that?" These 3 words were spoken slowly and carelessly, but between the lines, one could see that they were filled with displeasure. There was a biting cold air around him. It was as if anyone standing beside him would be stabbed by the sharpness of his aura. Chapter 258. Everyone looked at the man in disbelief, then looked at Li Qin. At this moment, they were a little confused. Didn't she say that her daughter had a sugar daddy? Could it be this man? Li Qin was even more shocked. The man's question silenced everyone. Who would dare to admit it? In front of Mu Yaja's powerful aura, everyone lost their earlier righteous indignation and lowered their heads awkwardly to do their own things. "How are you related to Xianxia?" Li Qin finally mustered up her courage to speak. Xianxia frowned in disgust. "Our family?" Why did Li Qin's attitude change so abruptly? "Who is she?" Mu Yaja glanced at Li Qin and lowered his head to ask. Xianxia obviously did not want to bother with Li Qin's unreasonable tantrum. When the man asked, she only replied, "Adoptive mother." Adoptive mother? The woman who forced her to sign the surrogacy agreement 6 years ago? Mu Yaja looked at her coldly. This woman's heart was truly vicious. If it were not for this agreement, what kind of crooked ideas would she have for Xianxia? Damn it. Li Qin was frightened by his cold gaze and took a step back. She was trembling. Why was this man's gaze so scary? It was like a knife, as if he wanted to carve a piece of flesh from her face. "What's the matter?" Xianxia glanced at Yun Na, who was lying on the hospital bed in a daze, and calmly explained, "My sister met with an accident, and now, she needs a large sum of money for plastic surgery. Otherwise, her face will be ruined. She's asking me for money. I don't have it and I can't pay for it." Mu Yaja asked, "How much does it cost?" Before Xianxia could speak, Li Qin immediately said, 1 million. 1 million. Xiaxia's eyes were tinged with embarrassment. Didn't she just tell her that it was 500,000? Why was it 1 million now? 1 million? Didn't you say 500,000? Why is it 1 million now? Xianxia said angrily. Li Qin said awkwardly, Aya, you heard wrong. However, before Xianxia could refute, another patient's family member who was originally on Li Qin's side stood up and said, she didn't hear wrong. I also heard you say that it was 500,000 yuan. Now you've changed it to 1 million yuan. Big sis, it's better not to be too greedy. Li Qin said angrily, I don't know which bastard caused my Nana to become like this. Her face is ruined. The doctor said that she needs 1 million yuan to restore her face. As Yun Na's elder sister, Xianxia naturally had the responsibility to bear some responsibility. We're all family. Now that we're in trouble. Obligation. Xianxia clenched her fists. What obligation do I have? Was she a bloodsucker? Was he going to suck her blood to the very last drop? How could he be so greedy? 1 million, I have it. Wuxia said calmly behind her. His casual words caused everyone in the ward to widen their eyes in shock. 1 million, he could easily open his mouth. Who was this man? Could it be that he was a billionaire? Li Qin's eyes lit up. She almost blurted out, that's great. My Nana's face can be saved. Who exactly was this man? How could he be so rich? That's right. The remuneration on the contract alone was a few million yuan. After she gave birth to the child, the employer paid another considerable sum. Chapter 259. Li Qin smiled and asked, Xianxia, how should I address this gentleman? Why aren't you asking him to sit down? Wuxia watched her every move expressionlessly and did not make a move. He said that he had the money, but he did not say that he would fork out the money. Li Qin felt a little awkward and could only look at Xianxia. Xianxia, how should I address this gentleman? Chairman Mu. On the hospital bed, Yun Na spoke timidly, looking nervous. Li Qin's eyes widened. Nana, you know him? Yes. Mom, he's the CEO of Dishing Financial Group, Chairman Mu. Li Qin's face turned pale at the mention of this title. Wuxia, the CEO of Mu Financial Group? Everyone knew that the Mu family was the wealthiest family in the capital. Oh my God, this man was the CEO of Mu Group. Ah, Xianxia, why didn't you tell me about such a big matter? When did you and young Master Mu? Anyone could tell that Li Qin was gnashing her teeth in hatred when she said this, but she still had to maintain a smile. Then Xianxia, you should pay more attention to your sister's matter. 1 million? That's a lot. I don't have that much. Xianxia rejected without hesitation. Suddenly, she added coldly, please get this straight. Even if I had the money, I wouldn't fork it out. Li Qin's face stiffened. She almost lost her temper when she heard her refusal. However, Wuxia was present. She could only suppress her anger and turn to him for help. Mr. Wuxia, you see, Nana is Xianxia's sister. We're in a pinch now. What do you think about this 1 million? Wuxia did not even look at her. He lowered his head and asked Xianxia, what do you think? He was obviously asking for her opinion. There was no doubt about the doting look on his face. It was obvious that as long as Xianxia agreed, this 1 million was just a string of numbers to him. Li Qin looked at Xianxia expectantly, only to hear her say indifferently, you think of a way yourself. I can't help you. Why can't you help me? Li Qin was so anxious that her eyes were red. Isn't young Master Mu here? How rich is the Mu group? 1 million is nothing to young Master Mu, isn't it? Even Wuxia couldn't help but frown at his undisguised ambition. The other people in the ward sighed, as if they had seen through Li Qin's character. Greed, insatiable greed. Could it be that they had misunderstood the girl? For a moment, everyone felt extremely guilty. Xianxia flew into a rage out of humiliation at her words. What was this? Was she forcing her to beg with her? Li Qin cried out in agitation. Xianxia, are you really going to leave him to die? Do you want your father to kneel down and beg you? Xianxia was infuriated. Li Qin was using Yun Yeqing to threaten her. I'm leaving him to die? Xianxia suddenly raised her chin and stared coldly into her eyes. She retorted word by word, she's your child, not mine. You're the one who taught her, not me. Why do I always have to clean up her mess? Yes, I was adopted by you, but am I your slave? Am I supposed to risk my life for you? How long are you going to use me? Isn't it enough? Haven't I been harmed by you enough? Li Qin was stunned. Everyone held their breaths. Chapter 260. Yun Shirshir held her aching forehead and said solemnly, "If I had such a daughter, I'd feel ashamed. You play the role of a loving mother in front of everyone, but have you ever truly cared about me? Even if I'm your biological daughter, you don't seem to care much about me. Do you know that she's gambling outside? Do you know that she's taking drugs outside? Yes, I'm her elder sister. That's why I'm always the one cleaning up after her mess. Have you ever cared? Have you ever asked? Her enemies came to my door to collect debts, and I lost my job. I even had to pay off her debts with my hard-earned savings. What else do you want? Mom, are you a vampire? Will you only stop when you suck my blood dry?" Li Qin's face flushed red at her words. Mu Yaja was slightly startled. He could not help but recall the day when he bumped into her. She seemed to be carrying a box and looked as if she had been kicked out of the company. So that's the reason? I advise you, instead of going around begging for help when something happens, it's better for you to educate your daughter properly before this happens. Today, she's disfigured, but what about tomorrow? Trouble comes from the mouth. Why do I have to bear the consequences for her every time something happens? Why should I? After a pause, she continued, I don't have time to waste with you. Yu is still waiting for me. If you stop me again, I won't go easy on you. With that, Yun Shirshir turned around and was about to leave when she bumped into Yun Yeqing, who was standing at the same spot with the bill in his hand. Dad. Yun Shirshir was stunned. She did not know how long he had been standing outside the door and how much of her words he had heard. Shirshir, is this true? He asked in a daze. She's taking drugs and gambling outside? Did you pay off her debts on her behalf? Yun Na trembled in fear at the sight of Yun Yeqing. Eminent, Yun Shirshir. Why did she reveal all these? Isn't she trying to get me killed? Dad, don't ask anymore. I don't want to talk about it. I've done a lot for this family, but they don't welcome me. If you don't welcome me, I'll just leave. Yun Shirshir lowered her head and brushed past him. I'm sorry, Yu sick. I'm not in the mood to talk about this. Is Yu sick? Yun Yeqing was shocked. Just as he was about to chase after Mu Yaja to clarify the matter, he saw the latter turn around and glare at him coldly. His sharp gaze caused him to stop in his tracks, not daring to step forward. Mr. Yun, I suggest that you clean up your household affairs first. If you don't deal with it, I don't mind intervening. The meaning behind his words was that if he were to make a move, then he would surely not let Li Qin and Yun Na have an easy time. After saying that, Mu Yaja followed behind Yun Shirshir and disappeared around the corner of the corridor. Yun Yeqing walked into the ward in a daze. The moment he raised his head and saw Li Qin's uneasy face, his face darkened. Hubby, Pa. What she got in return was a slap that turned into anger out of humiliation. Li Qin covered her face, dumbfounded. She did not expect him to slap her. In her momentary daze, he gave her another slap. This time, he used more force, causing her to fall backward and hit the cabinet. Blood flowed from her head. Yun Yeqing did not care that there were other people in the ward. His anger made him lose his rationality. You disgrace. Don't you think things are messy enough? Are you a beggar? Are you asking for money from others? Why did I marry a wife like you? You're a disgrace to the Yun family. Yun Na was so frightened that she hid in the corner. Chapter 261. Yun Yeqing sat on the stool in a huff. He slammed the bedside table and glared at Yun Na. Let her go. Isn't she shameless? What's the use of caring about her looks when she's already so embarrassed? Not only is she disfigured, she doesn't even want her face and dignity anymore. She can't live like this anymore. He paused for a moment before saying in a pained voice, Li Qin, let's get a divorce. Take our daughter and leave. I can't afford to have a wife like you, nor can I afford to raise a daughter like you. There was an eerie silence in the ward. Everyone was stunned. Yun Na was so frightened that she covered her mouth with tears streaming down her face. Li Qin's face cracked when she heard the word divorce. Yu was lying on the bed reading a newspaper. His hearing had always been sharp. He seemed to have heard hurried footsteps coming from the corridor. He immediately threw the newspaper aside, lay back on the bed, and signaled to Li Hanlin with his eyes. Li Hanlin immediately got the hint. The little lad closed his eyes and pretended to be dead. He got up and walked to the door to open it, only to see Xianxia and Mu Yaja walking toward him. Mu. Li Hanlin's lips twitched. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Why was Mu Yaja here? When Xianxia saw him, she quickened her pace and walked to the door of the ward. She looked inside anxiously. The ward was a normal one, but under Li Hanlin's arrangement, there were no other patients. In the spacious ward, Yu lay quietly on the bed next to the wall. His little face was as pale as a sheet of white paper. His lips, in particular, were cracked and dry. His mother's heart ached so much that she felt like tearing it apart when she saw it. Xianxia asked worriedly, "Principal, how are you?" "How is Yu?" Li Hanlin pursed his lips and pretended to be worried and reproachful. "Why you only here now? I've never seen such an irresponsible mother like you. Yu's condition doesn't look too good. The doctor said that this isn't the first time he's had an attack like this." "Yes, it's not the first time I've had a relapse, but it's the first time I've had a relapse in 2 years." Xianxia's heart clenched into a ball, and she couldn't help but tear up. Yu was her Achilles heel. When she thought about how Yu had to go through so much pain at such a young age, she wished she could take her child's place and bear this pain. Li Hanlin nodded, pretending to be serious. If she didn't take good care of her body, the chances of her relapse would only increase. At that time, her condition would worsen and she would have to undergo surgery. But the child is so young. I'm afraid that his body won't be able to take such a big operation. Thank you. Has he not woken up yet? Li Hanlin shook his head regretfully. Although his condition has stabilized, the little guy has not woken up yet. However, you don't have to worry. The doctor said that the condition is under control. It's not a big problem for now. Thank you. Xianxia thanked him and immediately walked towards the bed. Mu Yaja was about to enter the ward, but Li Hanlin stopped him at the right time. The latter looked at him with a displeased expression. His cold gaze seemed to be asking why Li Hanlin stopped him. Li Hanlin was shocked by his sharp gaze, but he immediately said, "You can't go in." Mu Yaja frowned slightly. He raised his hand and swatted Li Hanlin's arm away. Then he slowly walked into the ward. Li Hanlin, who was standing at the door, was obviously shocked. Chapter 262. Xianxia sat on the edge of the bed anxiously. She looked at little Munchkin's pale face and gritted her teeth. Her heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. She reached out and caressed Yu's face, but all she felt was coldness. Xianxia frowned, her heart throbbing in pain. It was so cold as if there was no warmth at all. Tears flowed out of her eyes uncontrollably. Her heart ached so much that she couldn't control herself. "Yu." She called out his nickname softly, but her voice was as soft as a mosquito, for fear of waking him up. Mu Yaja stood behind Xianxia and looked at little Munchkin on the bed. His heart felt strangely suffocated at that moment. What kind of emotions would a man feel when he saw his biological son whom he had lost contact with for a full 6 years? He only felt that something was constantly surging in his heart. This kind of feeling was unfamiliar and warm, and it was difficult to describe with any words. It wasn't the first time he had realized that he was a father. Back then, when this woman gave birth to Xiao Yichen for him, he, who had always been calm, actually made mistakes in the board meeting. After the meeting, he rushed to the Mu family's private hospital and took the infant from the nurse. It was so small, with a small head, a wrinkled face, and a pair of eyes that were tightly squinted. It was difficult for the infant's 2 small hands to hold his index finger. When he held the child in his arms, the crying child stopped crying in an instant. He waved his arms and hugged his hand. Then he sucked on his finger out of instinct and started sucking on it. Mu Yaja was tickled by the child's interesting reaction, and his eyes were filled with joy. At that moment, he thought that he was dreaming. He was a father? He didn't have a happy marriage. He didn't have a beloved wife. He didn't even have the experience of waiting outside the delivery room anxiously like other men. It was as if a xiaobao had fallen from the sky. He had become a father and he had a son. At that time, he swore to give this child a warm family. Even if this family didn't have a mother, he would be a good father. Muyaja's concept of a father was still that of his own father. But now that he had become a father, he felt somewhat at a loss, helpless, and complicated. It was his first time holding a child. He stared at Xiao Yichen for a long time, as if trying to find traces of himself on the child's face. But the child was still so young and his face was wrinkled. Only when he was 1 month old could he vaguely see that the child's lips were very similar to his, thin and well-defined. When little Yichen was a year old, even Grandpa Mu happily said that the child resembled him by 70 to 80%. Logically speaking, a son should be more like his mother, while a daughter should be more like her father. However, Xiao Yichen was extremely similar to him. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was a carbon copy of him. Now, as he stood in the ward and looked at Yu, who was lying on the bed, his heart was filled with complex emotions. Compared to 6 years ago, when he carefully carried a crying little Yichen in his arms, his feelings were even more complicated. When the pregnancy report came out that Xianxia was pregnant with identical twins, Grandpa Mu was very happy. However, the baby was born prematurely in August. He found out that his younger brother was not breathing when he was born and had died prematurely. He didn't even see the child with his own eyes, but he knew that the hospital had already taken care of the child's funeral. He was afraid that Grandpa Mu would be reminded of the past, so he didn't pursue the matter further. Chapter 263. Before he had met this child, especially when this child, whom he had never met before, had asked him to stay away from his mommy through the phone, he had only found it amusing and amusing. How capable could a child be? He had coldly warned him not to bully his mommy again, or else he would be irreconcilable with him. At that time, he had only admired this child. He was arrogant, courageous, and had inherited his bloodline of decisiveness. Even his tone was 100% similar to his. However, when he saw this child with his own eyes, his heart ached. This child and Xiao Yichen were twins. He could not help but sigh at the divine and miraculous nature of the Creator. Unlike other twins, this child's facial features and face were exactly the same. If the two of them wore the same clothes and stood next to each other without any expression, he would not even be able to tell who was who. However, upon closer inspection, there were some subtle differences. Xiao Yichen's eyes were more like his. They were deep and ethereal, with long and narrow eyes. His eyelashes were thick like the feathers of a phoenix, and his nose bridge was high and straight. The tip of his nose was upturned, forming an arrogant arc. However, the casual gentleness between his eyebrows reminded him of Xianxia. His small mouth, the outline of his face, and the color of his lips were like hers. Yu's eyes, on the other hand, were a little more like hers. The black and white were distinct. His jet-black pupils were watery, as if they were hiding a beautiful starry night. They were like pitch-black and translucent agate stones. His nose bridge was high and straight like his, while his lips were pink and tender, moist and glossy like hers. Xiao Yichen had always been well-developed, and his height had shot up very quickly. Although he was only 6 years old when he stood next to him, he was as tall as his waist. His delicate face was rosy and healthy, and his cheeks were chubby with a little baby fat. He could not help but want to kiss them. On the other hand, Yu was a little on the skinny side. Xianxia had always been very attentive when it came to nutrition, but perhaps the child did not absorb it well, for his height could keep up with his growth, but there was not much meat on his body. He was thin and small. Although he was about the same height as little Yichen, at a glance, his wrist was so thin that he could easily hold it with 2 fingers. Xianxia called out to him. Yu opened his eyes slightly. Seeing that he was awake, Xianxia was both surprised and happy. She hugged him and said sympathetically, Yu, you're awake. Mommy is late. I'm sorry. Yu's delicate little face cringed slightly and he pouted. His watery eyes were filled with tears of grievance. He rubbed against her arms longingly and grumbled, Mommy, why are you only here now? Yu has been waiting for you for a long time. Yu thought that Mommy didn't want Yu anymore. Sob. Yu hugged Yunshusher's neck with his little hands and rested his head on her shoulder in satisfaction. He rubbed against her like a kitten, greedily enjoying the warmth in her arms. However, when he suddenly opened his eyes and saw the man standing by the bed, his soft smile froze on his lips. Mu Yaja's footsteps were very light. He stood at the head of the bed for a long time and quietly sized him up without making a sound. However, when Yu opened his eyes and saw the man by the bed, his face turned cold and gloomy with his back facing Yunshusher. Chapter 264. It's him? Why is he here? He had thought that his mommy had come alone. Why did she bring this man along? Yu's expression tensed up. His thin lips formed a stiff line as he felt displeased. This was the first time Yun Tianyu looked at this man up close. The first time he saw his biological father was in a financial magazine. Initially, he thought that the photo had been edited. Otherwise, how could there be such a perfect man in this world? He was handsome, mature, and had an extraordinary temperament. Especially that cold and resolute face. Even though it was a cold photo, people couldn't help but be intimidated by it. The last time he saw him was at a gala. He clearly saw this man's handsome features and tall figure. It turned out that this perfect man existed in reality, too. At this moment, the father and son were facing each other. He looked at the little lad, and the latter sized him up with an appraising gaze. His eyes gradually filled with disbelief. He was an outstanding man. He was also a domineering man. He should be like him, a very possessive man. An extremely powerful aura emanated from his body. Wherever he went, the aura emanating from his body would spread to every corner. This was his biological father. When he was young, he did not have a father. When he saw other children with fathers, he was envious and confused. Why was it that when other children were a family of 3, their left hand holding mommies and right hand holding daddies, his right hand was empty? He often saw other children sitting on their father's shoulders. Every time he saw this scene, he was envious. His father was such a tall figure. It was as if, with him by his side, he had nothing to fear in this world. If there was a man of indomitable spirit in the family, he and mommy would not be looked down upon by others, much less be bullied, right? However, as he grew older, he began to resent his father's image. Why did daddy not want him and mommy anymore? He had asked his mommy a few times, but she had always evaded the question and had never given him a proper answer. Gradually, he became indifferent to the concept of a father. If there was no man, he would become a man. He would protect his mommy at all costs and by hook or by crook. Perhaps, in Li Hanlin's eyes, Yun Tianyu's maturity was not something an ordinary child could compare to. What he did not know was that Yu was only arming himself with his weak side and carefully hiding it. In front of Yunshusher, he was a sensible, well-behaved, and extremely obedient boy. In front of Li Hanlin, he was black-bellied, steady, and extraordinarily charismatic. He did not need a father. He did not want to share his mommy's love with anyone else. At this thought, Yu's little hands hugged his mommy's shoulders. This man was really taking over his mommy's life step by step. He couldn't just sit back and watch. Mommy, why haven't you come home for 2 days? There's only Yu at home. Yu is so scared. Yun Tianyu rested his small face on his mother's shoulder. His small lips opened and closed as he cried out in a trembling voice. His childish voice was hoarse and choked with sobs, making anyone who heard it feel heartache. Chapter 265. Yunshusher was hugging Yun Tianyu, so she could not see the expression on his face. However, when she heard the little lad's tearful complaints, her heart broke. Sorry. Yu mommy is wrong. Mommy won't leave Yu alone at home anymore. It's mommy's fault this time. You can punish mommy however you want. Mu Yaja stood by the bed with furrowed brows. This little lad was young, but he was quite scheming. He even knew how to make use of his mommy's guilt toward him. Although he spoke coquettishly, he glared at him coldly. He could not help but marvel at his superb acting skills. Yun Tianyu raised a brow and threw a cold glance at Mu Yaja. He then softly said to Yunshusher, "Stupid mommy, how can you bear to punish mommy? Mommy must have had something on last night, so she couldn't come back. Yu doesn't blame mommy, but don't leave Yu alone next time. Yu is really scared." With that, his lips curled up slightly as if he was showing off to the man. He then coquettishly said, "Mommy, if I must punish you, then I'll punish you by making you accompany Yu to bed every night and telling Yu stories." "But pinky promise, you can't go back on your words." Yu stretched out his pinky and hooked it. Xianxia gently wiped away the heartache in her eyes and hooked her pinky with his. "Pinky promise." Yu's eyes curved gently. He rested his forehead on Xianxia's and rubbed it coquettishly. He pouted and said, "Mommy, Yu forgives you." "You good boy." Tianyu suddenly looked at Wuxia and pretended to be surprised. "Mommy, who is this uncle?" Xiaxia's expression turned awkward. He didn't know that Yu already knew his identity. Now that little munchkin mentioned it, he didn't know what to do. How should he introduce them? Could it be that Yu, this is your daddy? Yu would be terrified. For 6 years, he had never mentioned anything about his biological father in front of the child. Now that he was suddenly told that he had a father, it was naturally difficult for him to accept. When she thought of this, her expression became extremely ugly. She subconsciously looked behind her and glanced at the man beside the bed. The latter was looking at her as if he was also waiting for her to explain. She sucked in a deep breath of cold air and could not help pursing her lips in distress. She really didn't know how to introduce him. Usually, her life was split between work and home, so she didn't have many friends. She had met a few of her friends, colleagues, and Yu. Although the child was young, he was very meticulous. While she was hesitating, Li Hanlin suddenly coughed lightly and secretly signaled Yu with his eyes. Wuxia turned to look at him. He immediately retracted his gaze and looked down. At the side, Xianxia suddenly reacted and explained with a smile, "Yu, this is Mommy's university professor. His surname is Mu, and he took good care of Mommy when we were in school." She rarely lied, so she felt a little guilty. After Xianxia introduced him, she secretly looked at the man's expression. Wuxia still had a gentle smile on his face. He didn't deny it, nor did he reveal any other emotions. However, when he looked at her from the corner of his eyes, there was a hidden meaning in them that she couldn't fathom. Li Hanlin snickered at the side. Chapter 266. Tianyu's expression did not reveal any surprise, but his eyebrows twitched subtly. Li Hanlin snickered at the side. This mother-son pair was really something. The son lied to his mother that his personal assistant was the kindergarten principal, while the mother lied to her son that the child's biological father was a university professor. The father-son pair was really something. They knew each other's identity, and the only one who was kept in the dark was Xianxia. Xianxia would never have guessed that the little rascal would be unaware of Wuxia's identity. Did she really think that Tianyu was a 6-year-old child? Li Hanlin's lips twitched at the thought of this. All right. Tianyu was indeed a 6-year-old child. Tianyu chuckled and greeted him gently. "So, you're Mommy's university professor. You look really young though. About 27 or 28. There was a gentle smile on her face, but her eyes were fixed on the man, and there was a faint taste of gnashing teeth. Wuxia chuckled. The little lad's eyes were really sharp. He could tell his age at a glance. Thus, he stretched out his slender hand and held the little fellow's little hand. The man's hand was broad and warm, fair and smooth, and his fingers were long and slender. The little lad's hand, however, was slightly cold. Although it was chubby, it was slightly pale. Due to Xianxia's presence, Tianyu could not shake off his hand. He could only put on a fake smile, feeling extremely awkward inside. Wuxia smiled and held his hand. He said lightly, "Little Yu, you can call me Uncle Mu." His voice was mellow and charming. Like aged wine, it was easy to get intoxicated. Xianxia was a little surprised. She did not expect this man to go along with her lie. His expression was so natural, as if he were really her university professor. Tianyu smiled unnaturally. "Uncle Mu, you must be very busy. Thank you so much for coming to see me so late. Mommy was taken care of by you in university. I must have caused you a lot of trouble, right?" Wuxia raised his eyes and looked deeply at Xianxia. He chuckled and said, "No. Your mommy is usually very obedient." For some reason, when he said this, there was a deeper meaning behind it. Xianxia turned her face away unnaturally, and the corners of her lips were a little stiff. Just as they were exchanging pleasantries, someone knocked on the door respectfully. Shortly after, a man in a suit led a few of Yun Tianyou's attending doctors in. Xianxia was a little surprised. She recognized this man. This man in a suit was the director of this hospital, Meng Qingyang. But why was he here? While he was in doubt, he saw Meng Qingyang walk to Wuxia's side with a respectful and warm smile. He had just received news that the young master of the Mu family, the young CEO of the Mu group, had appeared in his hospital. He had rushed over immediately. Although he did not know why he was suddenly here, this was a big deal. One must know that even if the sky were to collapse, this distinguished person must not be neglected. Of course, he must be treated well. One must know that in the future he still had to rely on this big shot. Chapter 267. Meng Qingyang was dumbfounded by his words. "Student? Father?" Meng Qingyang glanced at Xianxia, who was standing at the side with a stupefied expression. He pondered for a moment, and although he did not quite understand what was going on, he knew how to judge the situation. Thus, he cooperated and said, "Hello, Mr. Mu." As he spoke, he sized up the beautiful woman standing at the side. For a moment, he could not figure out her identity. She looked quite obedient. Judging from her attire, she did not look like a student, but her appearance was still young and her face was unbelievably beautiful. As he thought of this, he hummed politely in agreement with his remark. "Is this Mr. Mu's student? One look and I can tell that she's a talented woman." Xianxia exchanged pleasantries with an embarrassed look on her face. The corner of Li Hanlin's mouth twitched. Everyone in the room, be it old or young, male or female, was acting. Were they all good at acting? Wuxia surveyed the ward. Narrowing his eyes, he slowly said, "This ward seems a little shabby. It's not suitable for the patient to recuperate." As soon as his cold voice fell, Meng Qingyang broke out in a cold sweat. He smiled apologetically and nodded his head repeatedly. He then turned to reprimand the attending doctor. Indeed, this ward was too shabby, but it could not be helped. Li Hanlin originally wanted to arrange a VIP ward for Yun Tianyu, but the latter was worried that his mother would be suspicious, so he arranged for the most ordinary ward. Thus, Li Hanlin paid for the ordinary ward. Meng Qingyang broke out in a cold sweat, and so did the attending doctor beside him. Before this, how could he have expected that the patient in this ward would be related to such a big shot? If he had known earlier, not to mention the ICU ward, even the only VIP ward in the inpatient department would be vacated for him. "Yes, I'll change this child's ward to the VIP ward right away." Xianxia stared at them with her mouth agape. In her memory, this attending doctor was quite unreasonable and treated people coldly. In short, she did not have a good impression of him. However, when they saw the hospital director and several attending doctors beside him, who were usually serious in speech and manner, bowing in front of Wuxia, they could not help but secretly click their tongues. After exchanging some pleasantries, Meng Qingyang walked out of the ward. Meng Qingyang's eyebrows relaxed and his face relaxed. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After walking a little further, he turned around and asked Zhao Rui behind him, "Zhao Rui, let me ask you, who is the patient in that ward?" Background? Zhao Rui was confused. "Nothing special. He's just an ordinary patient. Take special care of him in the future. Vacate that intensive care unit and let him stay there. Send me the best specialist and nutritionist. There can't be the slightest bit of negligence." Then, he instructed meticulously, "If the patient has any requests, as long as they are not too demanding, try your best to satisfy them." But Zhao Rui was puzzled. Meng Qingyang asked, "Do you know who the man sitting by the bed in the ward is?" Zhao Rui shook his head in confusion. "Anyway, he has a big background. Not to mention you, even I have to look at his face for a living." Chapter 268. Just thinking about it scared him. Anyway, Meng Qingyang left with a peace of mind after giving him detailed instructions. Zhao Rui did not know the inside story, but as a doctor, his duty was to take care of people's problems. This was his job, so he would not neglect it. After sitting in the ward for a while, Yu suddenly looked up at Xianxia and said coquettishly, "Mommy, Yu is hungry. It's empty. Is it growling?" As he spoke, he pouted and silently flattened his little belly. His pair of innocent eyes blinked at her, looking very aggrieved. Xianxia immediately asked gently, Yu, what do you want to eat? Mommy will go to the supermarket to buy it for you. There were many 24-hour convenience stores and cake shops near the hospital. It was very convenient to cross the road. But it's so late. Yu is really worried. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. He clasped his hands together and said softly to Li Hanlin, "Principal, why don't you accompany my mommy?" Li Hanlin immediately understood and nodded. Xianxia was a little embarrassed and declined, "No, thank you. It's so late now. Why don't you let the principal go home early?" "It's okay. The principal has always been very kind. Mommy, you're so weak. What if a bad uncle kidnaps you in the middle of the night? Principal Li is very powerful. He can protect you. Yeah, it's not too late anyway. I'll accompany you to buy things, send you upstairs, and go home. Don't worry about it. I like Yu very much. I already treat him as my own son." As soon as Li Hanlin finished speaking, he suddenly felt the sharp gaze of the man beside him, which was as sharp as a knife, on his face. Wuxia looked up and fixed his cold eyes on him. There was a hint of displeasure in his expression. It was as if he was questioning his words. Treat him as your own son? If looks could kill, he would have been cut into pieces. Li Hanlin took out a handkerchief and wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. This father and son were so alike. The little one's aura was already intimidating enough. The bigger one's legs would turn to jelly with just one look. At that moment, the atmosphere in the ward was a little strange. Wuxia, Little Munchkin, and Li Hanlin exchanged glances. Xianxia did not notice anything unusual about the three of them. She only thanked Li Hanlin gratefully. "Thank you, Principal. I still don't know how to thank you for this matter. It's so late, let me treat you to a cup of coffee." The two of them were about to leave, but before they could step out of the ward, she felt a tug on her arm and was pulled back. Wuxia had one hand in his belt. He leaned over slightly and whispered in her ear, "Come back soon, okay?" I don't like you being with other men." Wuxia breathed into her ear with a devilish smile, but there was a hint of warning in his eyes. Xianxia's face turned red from his domineering and ambiguous words. She glared at him with her clear eyes, wanting to say something. "Who are you to control me? Isn't it my freedom to be with whoever I want?" "Little mouth, you're quite fierce, huh?" Wuxia was displeased. He gently bit her lip, not caring that they were in front of Li Hanlin. Li Hanlin stood at the side, not knowing where to look. Chapter 269. Fooling around? How is this fooling around? Xianxia lowered her voice. "Don't be naughty in front of the child." Wuxia's lips curled into a devilish smile, but he did not heed her advice. As if deliberately going against her, he kissed her on the lips again. Li Hanlin was caught off guard by the public display of affection. He didn't even have a chance to dodge. His mouth was stuffed with a bulging bag of dog food. He only felt that he was so redundant standing there and couldn't wait to escape. Yun Tianyu, who was sitting on the bed, was stunned by the man's abrupt action. From his angle, he couldn't see what the man was doing. He could only see that he was lowering his body, and his well-proportioned body almost blocked his line of sight. He could only vaguely see that his mommy's face was flushed with an ambiguous blush. At that moment, something seemed to explode in his head. He angrily grabbed the pillow and punched it. Still, he could not help but ask with a fake smile, "Mommy? What are you and Uncle Mu doing?" Xianxia awkwardly pushed Wuxia away at once. The man's face did not show any signs of unnaturalness. He raised a finger and slowly said, "Shh, I'm whispering to your mommy." The devilish smile on his face was obviously a blatant provocation to him. Yun Tianyu's lips curled into a smile, but the expression in his eyes had long been distorted beyond recognition. The corner of the blanket in his hand was also crumpled into a ball from his ravaging. Xianxia, who was standing at the side, felt even more awkward. Whispering, "This man is really..." Xianxia suppressed her anger and smilingly said to her son, "Mommy will go buy bread for you now. You must be good and not run around in bed." With that, she warned Wuxia, "Professor Mu, please take care of my Yu. I'll be back soon." With that, Xianxia and Li Hanlin left the room. Just as the door to the ward closed, the father and son faced each other in the room. Yun Tianyo's smiling face turned cold all of a sudden. The gentle and doting smile on the little lad's face when he looked at Xianxia earlier had long since disappeared. Wuxia looked at his serious expression. For a moment, he seemed to see his younger self in him. She was always cold and emotionless. She was always in a defensive posture, completely sealing herself in her own world. She had never opened her heart to anyone. Yun Tianyu looked at him coldly. His eyes were filled with vigilance, scrutiny, and indifference. Wuxia couldn't help but smile. He couldn't help but walk forward and sit beside the bed. Facing him sideways, he slowly reached out his hand and gently stroked his cold cheek. Yun Tianyo's face froze as his body stiffened. Almost subconsciously, he raised his hand and slapped the man's hand away. "Don't touch me." His words were cold and emotionless. There was only indifference. Thinking of his provocative behavior in front of him, he was filled with displeasure. Wuxia raised a brow in surprise. This little bun seemed to be full of hostility toward him. When Xianxia was around, he could still put on a smile to deal with him. When Xianxia was not around, the little bun could not even be bothered to put on a pretense in front of him. He suddenly felt that this little bun had inherited some aspects from his mommy. Chapter 270. He raised his eyes and stared coldly at Wuxia. Expressionlessly, he flipped the blanket aside and got off the bed. He slowly walked to the window, leaned against the wall, and crossed his arms. "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be at home accompanying your fiancé at this time? You're always pestering my mommy, it's so annoying." The moment he opened his mouth, the first word was full of thorns. It pierced through him so coldly that it was painful. Wuxia was not at all surprised by his indifferent and cold tone. This child was too sensitive. He carefully hid his most vulnerable side. Wuxia saw him leaning against the wall as if the huge wall was his only support at this moment. "Are you very pleased with yourself?" Wuxia looked at him with a raised brow. The little lad pursed his lips tightly. At this moment, he was like a little beast that had lost control and no sense of security. He hugged his arms tightly and suppressed all his anger and uneasiness. He repeated his words again. "Are you very pleased with yourself for bullying my mommy in front of me?" "Wuxia?" He called him by his name. Wuxia was not angry at all. He only curled his lips and slowly said, "According to seniority, you should call me Daddy." "Daddy?" Yun Tianyo's good-looking brow arched. "On what basis?" Wuxia said, "On the basis that my blood flows in your veins." "Is this answer enough?" The father and son, one big and one small, formed two extremes that were like fire and water. Yun Tianyo's eyes turned cold. "Is it enough?" "Not enough." He suddenly raised his arrogant chin and stared straight at the man's handsome face. His tender voice revealed a firmness that could not be ignored. "Do you think that just because we are related by blood, I should call you Daddy? I'm 6 this year. 6 years old. Have we met in the past 6 years? Have you ever fulfilled your responsibility as a father? Now, you suddenly appear out of nowhere and want me to acknowledge you as my daddy?" As he spoke, his frail body began to tremble. Yun Tianyo's brows furrowed tightly. He lowered his head and gripped his wrist tightly as if he could suppress the anger in his heart. He lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Wuxia, I think you're mistaken about something. It's not because we are related by blood that I should recognize you as my father." Wuxia was stunned. Yun Tianyu looked up at him and sneered. "Did you carry me when I was born? When I'm afraid of the dark at night, have you ever sung a nursery rhyme beside my bed to coax me to sleep? When I was bullied by other children, did you comfort me by my side? When I was in kindergarten, all the children were taken home by their fathers. Where were you when mommy was being bullied? Now, 6 years have passed. You appear out of nowhere and want me to call you Daddy. Wuxia, do you think you're qualified? His tone was not agitated, and his voice was calm and steady as usual. However, his childish voice was faintly trembling. Even though he was calmly narrating something that had happened to someone else, his words were laced with blood and tears that had long since dried up. Yun Tianyu coldly said, "You'll never know how Mommy and I have spent the past 6 years." Chapter 271. That's right. I didn't know that I had a father like you. Yun Tianyu continued solemnly, "When I first saw you in the magazine, I honestly felt agitated, wronged, and regretful." After a pause, the little lad raised his head and his lips curled into a mournful smile. "What I'm excited about is that I actually have a biological daddy. Moreover, the man who gave birth to me is so outstanding and outstanding. I was aggrieved because where were you for the past 6 years? Regretfully, no matter how outstanding you are, I can't entrust Mommy to you." Wuxia's brows knitted tightly together. The little lad's accusation made his heart clench and almost suffocate him. It was not that he did not feel heartache. His heart ached so much that it felt as if a heavy rock was pressing down on it, making it hard for him to breathe. Initially, he was a little surprised by his son's intelligence, but more than that, he was astonished. He and Xiao Yichen were twins, but unlike Xiao Yichen, this child was more mature and steady. This level of maturity was not something that someone his age should have. 6 years old was the most innocent age in a child's life. Children at this age were more likely to enjoy the innocence and beauty of childhood. He, however, bore a burden that children his age should not bear. This maturity was only natural, though. Little Yichen had been doted on ever since he was born. With him as the center, Mu Sheng's love, as well as his doting, had never stopped revolving. Even Mu Wanru, who was not close to him, had always indulged him in all matters, big or small. Although she was not his biological mother, Mu Wanru still fulfilled her duty as a mother. Yun Tianyu was different. He did not breathe the moment he was born. There were only weak signs of life, and he almost lost his life. Relying on his innate survival instinct, he let out a weak cry and came into this world. However, he did not have Xiao Yichen's health and liveliness from birth. Before he was 2 years old, he had experienced physical torture and pain. Gradually, he realized that his body was not as healthy as other children. He also realized that he was different from other children. When he returned home, he was already used to Li Qin and Yun Na's sarcasm, ostracism, and unbearable humiliation. His childhood without a father was accompanied by bullying and humiliation, but he was never willing to mention it to Xianxia. Because of this, his mature personality was formed. Yun Tianyu clenched his fists tightly. Suddenly, he relaxed them and his voice returned to its usual coldness. "Since I was born, I only have a mommy and no daddy. I didn't have one before, and I won't have one in the future." Wuxia asked. Biting his lower lip hard, he coldly spat out, "That's because I don't need it." His voice fell, but there was a long silence. Until he spoke again. "I like you very much." Yun Tianyu, his body stiffened, his shoulders trembled. He asked gently, "Don't you like me?" She carefully probed him, trying to find out his true intentions. Yun suddenly, "I like you a lot." These 5 words seemed to have some irresistible magic. In an instant, his uneasy heart calmed down, and his face flushed with shyness. Chapter 272. I don't need you to like me. It's enough that Mommy likes me. This child was actually a little arrogant. "I've told you before that you're not allowed to provoke my mommy. Wuxia, do you think I can't do anything to you?" Wuxia did not make a sound. Looking at his reddened face, which was full of awkwardness and hostility, he curled his lips. The ward was silent for a moment. After a long silence, Wuxia stood up abruptly. His tall figure instantly made the entire ward seem small and narrow. The man's aura was so strong that you had no choice but to puff out his chest. Alas, it was to no avail that his aura was completely suppressed in front of the man. The father and son stood facing each other. The height difference was so big that you could only raise his head to look at him. His neck was a little sore. He was so tall. Just like what he had imagined, his father was really tall and upright. His stalwart body seemed to be able to withstand all kinds of wind and waves. It was indestructible. When he first met him at the gala, he could not help feeling envious of his outstanding height. How nice would it be if he could grow up to be as tall as him? However, now that this man was standing before him, he realized that he was more handsome than he had imagined. It was not that he did not feel envious. Yun Tianyu muttered inwardly, "He is so tall, can't he squat down?" He raised his head to look at him. His height alone was enough to suppress him. As if telepathy between father and son, Mu Yaja seemed to have guessed his thoughts. He walked forward and half-squatted in front of him. Yun Tianyu was startled. This man was friendlier than he had imagined. Yun Tianyu. Mu Yaja calmly gazed at his face. His large palm gently caressed his cheek. This time, for the first time, Yun Tianyu did not resist his touch. Or perhaps, when he gently called his name, the man's deep and mellow voice was tinged with tenderness. It was exceptionally pleasant to the ears. He sized up the man. The man was also sizing up the stubborn little munchkin in front of him. However, the boy did not notice that the man's fingertips were trembling slightly as they caressed his cheek. Little Munchkin's handsome and adorable face. His skin was soft and supple, and his pair of dark and watery eyes seemed to be hiding the beautiful moonlight. 6 years ago, he had thought that the child had unfortunately died. However, when the child stood in front of him in perfect condition, the man who had always been calm and steady lost control. "Do you know who I am?" "I know." Yun Tianyu, too, calmly looked into Mu Yaja's eyes and slowly said, "Dishing Financial Group, so, Mu Yaja. You're so smart." Mu Yaja gently pinched his son's cheeks, his eyes full of undisguised affection. "That's nonsense," Yun Tianyu retorted bluntly. Mu Yaja said, "You're a little different from what I imagined." "What's the difference?" Yi was a little curious. The man frowned slightly and casually said, "You're a little devil and a mommy's boy." Yun Tianyu raised a brow unhappily. "I'm a mommy's boy. What's wrong with that? Is there anything wrong with being a mommy's boy? If a son doesn't dote on his mommy, who will? Can you count on other men?" He seemed to be hinting at something by other men. Chapter 273. Yun Tianyu coldly retorted, "How can you be in pain? Don't you have a fiancé?" "Mu Yaja, let me tell you, mommy is a treasure in my heart. If you want to dote on my mommy, it must be legitimate. Or do you treat marriage as child's play? I don't know what mommy is thinking. However, I won't allow a relationship without a proper status." The little guy was still young, yet he knew that he needed a proper status. "Do you think that mommy is a woman you can toy with as you wish?" Yun Tianyu arrogantly crossed his arms, his eyes cold. "As long as I, Yun Tianyu, am around, no one can bully my mommy. You can try if you dare." There was no doubt in his threatening tone that he would not show mercy to those who bullied his mommy. The father-son pair's conversation was more like a negotiation, and it had already reached a boiling point. Mu Yaja lightly said, "You said that you will protect your mommy. I don't doubt your ability. However, have you ever thought that when you grow up and get married and have children, your mommy will be all alone again? Can you bear to do that?" Yun Tianyu firmly said, "I won't get married and have children. I will accompany my mommy until she grows old. I will stay by her side and never leave her." The little lad's eyes were exceptionally resolute when he said those words. "Don't you wish to have a complete family?" Mu Yaja pinched his little hand and gently placed it in his palm. His lips curled into a smile. "A daddy, mommy, and an elder brother?" Yun Tianyu coldly withdrew his hand from the man's palm and slowly said, "A complete family isn't enough. If we don't love each other enough, being together will only be painful." Mu Yaja was stunned. He did not expect this child to know so much. "If my mommy falls in love with a man one day, perhaps I will respect her choice. However, the prerequisite is that this man must love my mommy enough. Although I can't interfere in matters of the heart, it doesn't mean that I can sit back and do nothing. I won't let anyone hurt her." Yu suddenly looked at him and took a step closer to him. She poked his chest with her little finger and asked coldly, "If that's the case, then let me ask you, do you like my mommy?" Her soft fingertips poked at his chest, but she didn't use much strength. Mu Yazhe suddenly fell silent. In fact, even he himself did not know what kind of feelings he had for Xianxia. What is like? In the world of love, he was like a blank piece of paper without any color. He didn't understand feelings, and he didn't know what love was. For as long as he could remember, he was like a marionette. It was only when Xianxia was born and he looked at the baby's tender face in his swaddling clothes that he vaguely understood his father's feelings for his son. Emotionally, he was clumsy. He doted on and spoiled Xianxia in every possible way. He wanted to give him the best in the world. Now, his heart ached for Yu and he loved her to the core. The more he looked at the boy, the harder it was for him to control that distinct and unfamiliar feeling in his heart. Perhaps this was a father's love. This feeling of blood being thicker than water seemed to have seeped into his bones along with his blood. It was very clear. At the same time, he wanted to give him a warm family. In this family, there was a father, a mother, and an elder brother. He wanted to make up for the 6 years that this child had been missing. However, when this child poked his heart and questioned him, he was a little lost. Chapter 274. Did he like her? What did it mean to like her? If he had a strong possessiveness toward her, and this was considered as liking her, then he could answer that he liked her. However, he understood that possessiveness and desire did not mean that he liked her. Thus, he was momentarily at a loss regarding this question. Seeing his hesitation, Yu was displeased that he was still hesitating over this question. You're hesitating for so long. I can tell that you don't like my mommy at all. Yu paused for a moment, his eyes revealing a hint of coldness. Since you don't like her, then, why are you still provoking my mommy? You have an older brother, Mu Yazhe suddenly said. Yu was stunned for a long time before replying, I know. Why did he suddenly mention that child? Yu looked at him in confusion and did not speak again. At the mention of Xianxia, a doting smile appeared on Mu Yazhe's face. His name is Muichin. He's as tall as you. When he stands next to you, even I can't tell who is you and who is him. Yes. Yu's eyes suddenly became a little dazed. He knew that he had an older brother. In fact, he did not reject this older brother. It was just that he subconsciously resisted him. However, hearing Mu Yazhe mention him, he was a little more curious about this older brother of his. Perhaps it's telepathy between brothers? He always mentions to me that he has a younger brother. Mu Yazhe looked at him and smiled. At first, I thought that he was just a child's babble. Now, I find it incredible. I can't help but marvel at the wonders of the Creator. As soon as he finished speaking, Yun Tianyou's face was filled with disbelief. At the same time, his eyes could not help but become a little dazed. He dreams of me? Mu Yazhe said lightly, I want to give him and you a complete family. Yu, are you willing? His thin lips opened and closed as he gently called out her nickname. In an instant, it was as if there was some strange emotion piercing her heart. Caught off guard, an inexplicable feeling spontaneously arose in her heart. A complete home. A home where he had a father, a mother, and perhaps a brother who loved him dearly? In front of him, this man was gently asking for his opinion, asking if he was willing. His heart longed for it so eagerly. However, when he opened his mouth, he said with an awkward expression, I don't want to. The man's expression did not change. Obviously, he was not surprised by his answer. Not to mention letting a 6-year-old child accept his identity as a father, even for himself, it took a lot of effort to digest the unexpected news that he had a 6-year-old son. Moreover, the child in front of him was extraordinarily intelligent and had his own opinions. From the conversation, the child's every word was to protect his mother. He did not give him a way out and pressed him step by step in order to test his feelings. Standing in front of him, he did not have the slightest bit of stage fright or fear of strangers. He was calm and decisive. When it came to his mother's happiness, there was no room for subtlety. His thoughts were also very clear between the lines, and his negotiation methods were also exactly the same as his. With just a few words, one could tell that he was a capable person despite his young age. From that sentence, Mu Yazhe, let me tell you, Mommy is a treasure in my heart. If you want to dote on my mommy, it must be justified. To the child, the most important condition for his happiness was his mommy's happiness. Chapter 275. Yu said coldly, "It's not enough that you like me. My mommy has to like you as well." Mu Yaja's eyebrows twitched. He was a little impressed by this child's domineering and arrogant attitude. As expected of his son, his every movement was filled with the demeanor of an imperial lord. Yu suddenly smiled. The elegant curve of his lips made him look like a polite little gentleman. "Mu Yaja, you better be clear about one thing. Maybe in your mind, your love is a great gift to other women. But to my mommy, this is just the basics of true love. My mommy is beautiful, gentle, and considerate. Moreover, she has me, her son, to dote on her. If you want to be with my mommy, both of you must like each other. Do you understand?" "So you're saying that I still have a chance?" Mu Yaja asked. Yu glanced at him from the corner of his eyes and snorted. "Yes, it depends on your performance. Then now." Mu Yaja suddenly opened his palms and looked at his delicate and beautiful face gently. He asked softly, "Can I hug you?" His gentle and mellow male voice was filled with the love of a loving father. Yu's heart suddenly stopped. His watery eyes widened slightly and his heartbeat slowed down. Seeing that he was hesitating, Mu Yaja nodded and waited for his response. Yu hesitantly stuck out the tip of his small tongue and moistened his dry lips. He looked at Mu Yaja's broad and warm chest with a faint desire in his eyes. No child could resist their father's warm hug. Little Yu was the same. His eyes suddenly felt a little sour and astringent. In his heart, he was a little excited and yearning. When he was young, after kindergarten, he would see children his age running into their father's arms and being hugged by those strong arms. Those images always hurt his eyes. Mommy's hug was soft, but mommy was too weak. When she hugged him, it was always a little uncomfortable. If he could be hugged by daddy, it would be very blissful. Strong arms, warm chest, and strong heartbeat. Sitting on his shoulders, he felt as if he could touch the sky if he reached out. That feeling must be very blissful, right? With a little yearning, Yu could not help but reach out his hand. It was as if his entire body was enchanted with some kind of irresistible magic, and he yearned for his chest. Mu Yaja's eyes were warm as he held onto his little hand. Yu was Yu's hands. His hands were small hands. Hands should be soft and tender. Although her small hands were small, her 5 fingers were slender and smooth. Her fingernails were clean, and her joints were distinct. They were very beautiful, just like his hands. They were soft in his hands. With a gentle squeeze, he easily wrapped his hands in his palms. Mu Yaja realized that he liked this son of his very much. He was smart, sensible, considerate, and overly mature. One could not help but feel tender affection for him. Yu suddenly shrank back. His expression was a little awkward. Looking at him, his cheeks were red and a little hot. As if he was afraid that the man would misunderstand, he immediately emphasized his position. "I'm letting you hug me because of mommy." Mu Yaja paused for a moment and smiled. Chapter 276. "But even if I let you hug me, it doesn't mean that I approve of you. It still depends on your performance." Although little Munchkin said no, his face was getting redder and redder. He was obviously a little shy. He looked awkward, but deep down he was yearning for this hug. Mu Yaja could tell that he was feeling awkward, but he pretended not to know. He only nodded and said, "Okay. Just once, just this once," Yu repeated. When the man nodded again, he pursed his lips and took a step closer to the man nervously. One step at a time, and then another, until Mu Yaja's muscular arms reached under his armpits and hugged him firmly into his embrace. In an instant, Yu's face was burning hot. Mu Yaja scooped up the little lad, his left arm supporting his little but effortlessly. The child was too skinny. Was it because of malabsorption or malnutrition? Or was it because that stupid woman didn't nourish him properly? Children at this age were still growing, so they should eat more. Yet he was so skinny. This was the similarity between mother and son. But he didn't know that it wasn't that Xianxia didn't pay attention to nutrition, but that little Munchkin's body was naturally weak and couldn't absorb enough nutrients. No matter how much he ate, he didn't gain weight. Hugging the little lad, who was as light as a feather, the man lowered his head to look at him. Yu, on the other hand, lowered his head shyly and buried his face in the man's arms. He was afraid that the man would catch a glimpse of his blushing face. What was this feeling? An unfamiliar fatherly love. It was the fatherly love he used to yearn for. His strong arms seemed to be able to hold up the sky. His warm chest seemed to be able to melt the coldest snow in winter. Yu carefully placed his head on his chest. What responded to him was a strong heartbeat. The tip of his nose suddenly felt sour, and a faint blush appeared on it. Unknowingly, his thick eyelashes had become wet. So warm, thump, 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 it was like the sound of a drum. Somehow, listening to the strong heartbeat, he felt an inexplicable sense of security. Unknowingly, he fell asleep just like that. When Xianxia returned with the bread and milk, little Munchkin was already fast asleep in Mu Yaja's arms. When he opened the door, this was the scene that greeted him. She saw Mu Yaja sitting on the edge of the bed with little Munchkin in his arms. Under the dim light, little Munchkin's face was rosy and his long eyelashes covered his eyes as he slept soundly. Li Hanlin, who was following behind him, also stopped in his tracks. He was afraid that he would wake up the little prince from his sleep. Mu Yaja heard the sound of footsteps and looked up to see that she had returned. He put a finger to his lips, indicating that she should be careful. Xianxia understood and turned to Li Hanlin with an apologetic smile. "Principal, thank you. Yu is asleep. It's late now. You should go back." "You're welcome." Li Hanlin smiled and could not help taking another look at Yun Tianyu, who was sleeping soundly in the man's arms. "Oh, this little bun is cuter when he's asleep. He's more like a docile 6-year-old child." Li Hanlin sighed and said to Xianxia, "I won't stay any longer. I'll take my leave first. See you next time." "But goodbye, Principal." She closed the door and the ward regained its silence. Chapter 277. Xianxia placed the items on the bedside table and sat down beside him. For a moment, both of them were silent. Initially, when she saw the man carrying the child with such a gentle expression, her heart fluttered. However, she couldn't help but feel worried. Would this man change his mind after seeing the child? Would he bring the child back to the Mu family? Although this man had tacitly agreed that she could keep the child by her side, he had never said that he would give up the child's custody. The wealthy had always placed great importance on passing down the family line. After all, this child was his flesh and blood. Even if he agreed, would the Mu family behind him agree to it? They probably wouldn't agree to it. Xianxia couldn't help but feel vexed. She was not attentive enough. She should have protected the child well. Now that his identity had been exposed, she was in a very passive position. Mu Yaja carried little Munchkin quietly and lowered his head to look at the child's tender little face. His expression was focused, and he didn't know how much time had passed. Xianxia was surprised. She was a little surprised. In her impression, this man had always been known to be domineering. When she first met him, he appeared in the dark room with a cold aura. His every move was indisputable, just like a high and mighty overlord who wouldn't allow anyone to resist or defy him. No matter how scared she was, the man didn't care about it at all. When they met again 6 years later, he was still as arrogant as ever. From the moment he was born with a golden spoon in his mouth. Born as a crown prince, he lived a life of luxury and wealth. He was born arrogant and haughty. However, at this moment, the man in front of her was so quiet and even more patient than she had imagined. What surprised her even more was the way he carried the child. There wasn't a trace of awkwardness. Little Yu could sleep so soundly in his arms. Did he often carry Xiao Yichen to sleep like this? He must be very experienced. However, with his status, he should have hired a group of servants to take care of the child, right? Or would he do it himself? After a long period of observation, the man suddenly raised his head and looked at her. When their eyes met, Xianxia was slightly shocked and immediately retracted her gaze. There was another long silence. Xianxia looked up at him, but saw that the man was still in the same position, as if his arm would never be sore. That was amazing. When she carried Yu for 2 hours, her arms could not take it anymore. They were sore and painful. Aren't you tired? Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows and shook his head. I'm not tired. How about I hold him for a while? Xianxia said. Mu Yaja gazed at little Munchkin's face and said slowly, no need. I want to hold him for a while longer. Xianxia mumbled, that's amazing. Don't your hands get sore? With a doting expression, Mu Yaja faintly said, Xianxia always had nightmares when he was young. Every time he woke up, I had to coax him to sleep. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. When he mentioned Xianxia, she felt as if there was a warm and sour feeling in her chest. Why do you always have nightmares? Mu Yaja frowned slightly, and there was a hint of confusion in his eyes. I dreamed that someone bullied his younger brother. Xianxia was stunned. What is this dream? I don't know. Mu Yaja narrowed his eyes. Maybe it's the telepathy between the twins? Chapter 278. Just as he finished speaking, a series of footsteps suddenly came from outside the door and stopped at the door of the ward. Knock, knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. Xianxia frowned and walked to the door to open it. Standing outside was her father, who looked weary and worried. She did not know why, but he seemed to have aged 10 years overnight. Startled, Xianxia looked behind him and did not see Li Qin and the rest. Seeing her guarded look, he quickly said, There's no one else. I'm the only one here. Dad. Xianxia looked at him with a complicated expression. She wanted to say something, but no words came out. Helplessness, heartache, guilt, and determination were written all over her face. He saw it all. He really owed this child too much. This time, he came here to sort things out. Sure, I'm here to see you. I also want to talk to you about something. Xianxia's lips curled up. Dad, Yu is fine. The doctor said that he's fine now. It's probably an old illness, so he's asleep now. Xianxia sighed and said slowly, Don't worry, I'll just take a look. I'll leave after that. Xianxia nodded and opened the door slightly. Xianxia walked in and, as if he did not see Mu Yaja standing at the side, walked straight to the bed. At this moment, Yu had been carefully carried to the bed by Mu Yaja. He was covered with a blanket, looking peaceful and docile. Xianxia sat by the bed and looked at his weak appearance. He wanted to reach out to comfort him, but halfway through he retracted his hand in annoyance. His face crumbled and was full of pain. I'm not worthy of him calling me Grandpa, Dad. He suddenly stood up and walked to the balcony. He waved at Xianxia and called her over for a talk. Xianxia immediately went to the balcony and closed the door. The father-daughter pair looked at each other for a long time. After a long silence, Xianxia suddenly burst into tears. You've suffered all these years. It's father's fault for not being able to protect you and letting you suffer so much. As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia's eyes immediately turned red. No one could understand the complicated feelings in her heart at this moment. All these years, Xianxia had always treated her like his own daughter. Even though Li Qin and Yun Na had never accepted her, at least he had fulfilled his responsibility as a father when it came to her food and clothing, no matter how big or small, at least. They were not related by blood. More than a decade ago, Xianxia had become infertile due to his illness. Li Qin had always wanted a son, so the two went to the orphanage to adopt a boy. At that time, when he first met her, it was in a dormitory. Xianxia stood by the window and looked at Xianxia, who was only 9 years old at that time. She hugged her body and curled up in the corner of the room, trembling. Her eyes were lifeless and her face was ashen. Taking a closer look at her body, it was covered with wounds. His face was green and purple, and his mental state was very poor. For some reason, Xianxia felt a throbbing pain in his heart. This child, be it her facial features or temperament, was very beautiful and pleasant. She looked like a very obedient child with beautiful eyes. However, for some reason she was the only one in the empty dormitory, hugging her knees and trembling in fear while the other children were playing outside. She must have been bullied by many children, right? Chapter 279. The teacher behind her looked embarrassed. Back then, Yun Yeqing had a successful career and had some prestige in the area. The teacher kindly reminded him, "Mr. Yun, have you taken a liking to this child? None of the teachers or children in the orphanage likes her. She seems to be a little autistic and has some mental issues. She doesn't like to talk and always has a gloomy face. She looks unlucky. Besides, she stole from another girl before, so the children ostracize her." "Stole?" Li Qin frowned and immediately said, "She can't steal. How can she have such a bad habit? Yeqing, don't waste time. Let's go see the other children. Don't talk." Yun Yeqing stopped her and said to the teacher in dissatisfaction, "Man is born kind. The child is so young and hasn't formed a good sense of honor and disgrace. Even if she made a mistake, as a teacher, shouldn't you guide her on the right path? Look at her, she's been bullied to this extent. You say that she has some mental issues, how can she not have any? The children around her are bullying her, and the teachers don't care. What can a child like her do?" The teacher was embarrassed by his righteous words and then led Yun Shirshir out. Standing in front of Yun Yeqing and looking at the man's incomparably kind face, Yun Shirshir was so scared that she shrank into a corner with her lips trembling. "I'm not a thief. I'm not a thief. Don't arrest me." Yun Yeqing did not know why, but his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. Even though he knew very well that he was not related to this child by blood, his heart ached so much that he almost could not breathe when he saw her fragile state. Hence, despite Li Qin's repeated objections, he still decided to adopt her. Thinking back, Yun Shirshir was still grateful to him. If not for Yun Yeqing's redemption and giving her a second life, she did not even know what would have happened to her during that dark childhood. No matter how Li Qin and Yun Na treated her, she had always been grateful to Yun Yeqing. He was silent for a long time before he slowly said, "I've decided to divorce her. We'll go and get the divorce done tomorrow." The he was referring to was naturally Li Qin. Yun Shirshir was surprised to hear that. Divorce? Was her father going to divorce Li Qin? Yun Shirshir tried to talk him out of it, while her husband only looked at her quietly. After a while, she decided to tell him what was on her mind. "Dad, I support your decision. It's wise to divorce her." I know. When it comes to marriage, we can only persuade them to reconcile, not to divorce. But Li Qin is too greedy. You'll only be a burden if you stay with her. Dad, why do you have to tire yourself out? It doesn't matter if I'm tired or not. I'm already so old. For a man of his age, he would make do if he could. Half of his body was already in the soil. If he were to get a divorce at this time, it would be unpleasant for anyone to hear about it. It was inevitable that people would gossip about it. But in the end, he couldn't bear to implicate his daughter. You, on the other hand, I feel the most guilty towards you. I even found out that she was the one who forced you to do what you did 6 years ago. I'm such a bastard. As he spoke, he stomped his feet and slapped himself hard. Chapter 280. He replied slowly, "It's all in the past, but I can't forgive her or let her go." As he spoke, he took out a handkerchief from his chest pocket. Inside it was a well-wrapped bank card. He looked at her. "There's more than 5 million yuan in here." 5 million yuan? "Yes," he continued. "This is the additional remuneration that your previous employer gave you." This was a check for 5 million yuan given to him by Mu Yaja's assistant. He did not touch a single cent and deposited it all into this card. Later on, the money he earned from his part-time job was also deposited into this card. Although it was not much, it was still a token of his sincerity. He saved this money for Yun Shirshir's dowry when she got married in the future. He was already old and did not have much capability. He was no longer as spirited as he was when he was young. His monthly salary was about 3,000 yuan. After deducting all his living expenses, he had not touched a single cent in the card for the past few years. He had always kept this card with him. Even Li Qin did not know that there was so much money in it. This was to prevent her from getting greedy when she found out. Even Yun Shirshir thought that this sum of money had been used to repay debts back then. When Yun Yeqing came looking for Yun Shirshir after Yun Na's accident, he wanted to find an opportunity to discuss this matter with her. He thought that with his daughter's accident, He had no choice but to ask Xianxia to withdraw tens of thousands of yuan from the card for urgent needs. He thought that she would agree to it given her gentle and considerate personality. Who knew that he would suddenly find out the truth of what happened 6 years ago? His world had been turned upside down and he could not accept it for a while. Now that he had made up his mind to divorce Li Qin, this card should be returned to its rightful owner. Although the property prices in the capital are rising day by day, the money in this card is enough to buy a decent house. Although I've divorced that woman, we're still father and daughter. If you're free in the future, you can bring Yu home to have a meal with me. That's enough. Dad, this money, Yun Yeqing said, this is your money. I didn't tell you earlier because I was afraid that woman would remember it. Daddy was keeping it for you, and now I'm returning it to its rightful owner. With Yu around, you must be living a tight life. Now that Yu was hospitalized, it was time to spend money. This sum of money should be able to solve the problem. Thank you, Dad. Xianxia took the bank card and smiled. Dad, you divorced her, but you also said that our father-daughter relationship is still there. You should live with us. I'll take care of you and Yu. Yun Yeqing hesitated. That's not good. It's not like you don't know that woman's character. Greedy for glory and splendor, he had always been used to being extravagant. If I were to stay with you, she would definitely come over and make a fuss again. I'm afraid that you and Yu wouldn't be safe. Now that you're successful, you can't let her drag you down. Yun Yeqing spoke with sincerity. He was truly thinking of the mother-son pair. After all, given Li Qin's character, she would definitely not let the matter rest. Yun Yeqing used that woman to refer to Li Qin. It was clear that he was extremely tired of this failed marriage. Chapter 281. Xianxia replied, What's there to be afraid of, Dad? As long as you don't let yourself be blinded by them and see their true colors, I'll be at ease. I'll take care of you in the future. Do you want me to watch you grow old and have no one to depend on? You've raised me since I was young. I'll definitely repay this favor. Repay? It was clear that he owed her so much. Yun Yeqing was both vexed and touched. His lips trembled as he nodded repeatedly. Although Xianxia was not his biological daughter, she was more filial than a biological daughter. Although he had given birth to a good-for-nothing ingrate, he was relieved to have such a considerate daughter like Xianxia. This time, he did not reject her and only said, Let's talk about it some other time. If I divorce her, she'll definitely not take it lying down. When the time comes, she'll make a fuss about splitting the family assets. You'll definitely be implicated. Splitting the family assets? Xianxia said angrily, Do you still want to split the family assets with that kind of woman? I won't share it with her. Fortunately, I didn't do anything stupid back then. When I bought this house, I registered it under your name. Even if we get divorced, she can forget about getting any benefits. This is an evil creature she created, so she should bear the consequences herself. I, Yun Yeqing, have never mistreated her. Even if we get divorced, my conscience will be clear. It's been hard on you. Xianxia was a little stunned. That small 3-bedroom apartment was a second-hand house he bought back then, yet it was registered under her name? When the father-daughter pair walked out of the balcony, they saw that the ward was filled with nurses. Yun Yeqing was stunned when he saw the handsome man standing by the bed. He seemed to have seen him before. At her father's question, Xianxia sized up Wuxia and said guiltily, He. This is my university professor. His surname is Mu. He's so young. Yun Yeqing was a little speechless. The man in front of him clearly looked to be in his late 20s. He was handsome and looked very young. The man raised his head. His perfect and exquisite facial features and handsome face made him look like a high and mighty noble. Just one look from him was enough to make one feel intimidated. He was clearly so young, but he looked extremely mature and reserved. His every movement had an extraordinary bearing. In front of him, it made others feel ashamed of their inferiority. Even Yun Yeqing could not help feeling uneasy. So, you're Xiaxia's university professor. Nice to meet you. You look so young. Wuxia also cooperated and nodded, but did not say anything. His attitude was very cold. What's going on? Xianxia was surprised to see that the ward was full of nurses. "Change wards," Wuxia said succinctly. Only then did Xianxia recall that the director had previously mentioned that he wanted to change their ward to a special class ward. But why were there so many nurses gathered here? She saw those nurses crowding around the ward's entrance. Their eyes were either stunned or filled with admiration as they sized up Wuxia. Initially, when the inpatient department director informed the young patient in this ward that he wanted to change to a special ward, a few nurses rushed over with the bed. However, as soon as they entered the ward, they saw this handsome man sitting in front of the bed, gently caressing the child's sleeping face. That perfect, godlike side glance instantly killed everyone. Gosh, the family member of a patient in Ward 702 is so handsome. How handsome is he? Chapter 282. For a moment, many nurses, who had nothing to do, gathered in the ward. The moment they saw Wuxia, everyone's eyes widened. Oh God! He's so handsome and tall. He should be 1.9 meters tall. He's a whole shoulder taller than me. Oh God! I wonder if he has a girlfriend? Is this child his son? He looks so much like him. Hence, the nurse's eyes darted back and forth between Wuxia and Xianxia. Some were suspicious, some were shocked, some were disappointed, and some were desolate. Is he already married? Oh God! This child should be 6 years old. It's hopeless. A group of people whispered among themselves. Although their voices were not loud, they still disturbed the little lad, who was sleeping soundly on the bed. Yu's brows furrowed slightly. Smacking his lips, he seemed to be really disturbed and kicked the blanket in dissatisfaction. Seeing that he was disturbed, Wuxia's face instantly turned frosty. Seeing this, Xianxia's heart ached a little. She walked over to the nurses and said, "I'm sorry. Please keep your voices down. Don't crowd around the ward door, lest you wake the child." Seeing Xianxia blocking her way, an intern nurse pushed her to the side in dissatisfaction. It's almost dawn now. The nurse on duty will be here soon to take his blood pressure. Besides, aren't you guys changing wards? Isn't it good that he's awake now? That's right. Some parents these days spoil their children too much. Xianxia's face was tainted with a hint of anger. Is this your work attitude? What do you mean? The intern nurse, who must have just graduated, retorted without knowing the gravity of the situation. Someone at the side immediately tugged at her sleeve. That's enough. Let's not talk about it anymore. We were a little loud just now. Are you that child's mother? The intern nurse suddenly gossiped. What's your relationship with this gentleman? I just heard from this woman that this man is her university professor. I heard on the news that a university professor is keeping a student as his mistress. Someone speculated in a low voice. Could it be that this child is their private? Is that enough? Xianxia flew into a rage out of humiliation. Do I need you to inquire about our relationship? As soon as her voice fell, she saw their eyes widen in horror as they looked behind her. Xianxia turned around belatedly, only to see Wuxia standing behind her. He impatiently swept his gaze over the crowd surrounding the door, his voice as cold as ice. There was a hint of sharpness in his tone. With just one word, the crowd instantly dispersed. Clean and direct. The ward instantly became much quieter. Xianxia sighed and was a little speechless. The procedures to transfer to another ward were completed very quickly. Not long after, the department director led 2 nurses to push a bed into the room and carried the little lad onto it. Xianxia supported the bed and left with the department director. Before he left, he reminded Xianxia, "It's already morning. Professor Mu, thank you very much for coming to visit Yu. You haven't rested for the whole night, so let Xianxia send you downstairs." Wuxia exchanged glances with him, his eyes slightly cold. Xianxia was intimidated by his gaze. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he hurriedly left. Chapter 283. Xianxia told him that this man was her university professor. He was not a 3-year-old child even though he had complimented him on the surface. It was clear that Xianxia was deliberately hiding this from him. Even though he was unsure of this man's identity, When he compared the father and son's appearance, he immediately returned to his senses. Thus, he could roughly guess this man's identity. He should be that mysterious employer from 6 years ago. He did not point it out as he was afraid that Xianxia would be embarrassed. Yun Yeqing escorted Yun Tianyou's bed and left. The ICU was on the 15th floor. Before he left, he did not forget to remind Xianxia to go back to rest and come back to the hospital to replace him. Yun Xianxia thought for a moment and nodded. She could go back to get some of Yu's clothes to change into. At the elevator entrance, Yun Xianxia said, "Mu Yaja, it's getting late. You should go back." Mu Yaja's expression was tinged with anger as he cocked a brow. "Are you chasing me away? I saw that you didn't sleep last night, so I'm afraid that you're tired." Mu Yaja's expression softened instantly, and a hint of mockery flashed in his eyes. "Oh, so you're feeling sorry for me? Think whatever you want." Yun Xianxia was a little annoyed as she said angrily, "Don't blame me when you don't have the energy to work." Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. With one hand in his pocket, he leaned over slightly and whispered into her ear, "I've always been energetic. Haven't you experienced it yourself?" His words were clearly hinting at something. Yun Xianxia bit her lower lip as her cheeks flushed red all the way to her ears. She glared at him in embarrassment and annoyance. "Ridiculous. I don't know what you're talking about." Ding! The elevator door opened. Yun Xianxia was about to step into the elevator when she was pushed into a corner and slammed into the cold wall. She could not help but widen her eyes in shock. Before she could react, the man's tall body was already pressing against her. It was a camera's blind spot. He had an ulterior motive. The elevator door closed. At this moment, only the two of them were left in the narrow space. Yun Xianxia was shocked and looked up at him in fear. Mu Yaja lowered his head and reached out to hold her chin tightly. His long and narrow eyes curled up devilishly. His eyes were deep and heavy. He let out an evil laugh and leaned closer to her face. Staring into her helpless eyes, he said in a low and hoarse voice, "Little liar, you're really interesting." "What are you doing?" Yun Xianxia turned her face away in a panic, but he pulled her face back and forced her to meet his gaze. "Heh, you usually look so obedient, but I didn't expect you to be so clever when it comes to lying." She was startled and her face flushed red unnaturally. She had no choice but to lie. How could he tell the truth in front of his father? Could it be that he had to confess to his father? This was undoubtedly tearing open his scab scar. Yun Yeqing had always been brooding over the contract from 6 years ago. He was annoyed at himself for not being capable enough to let his most beloved daughter become a surrogate. If she were to say this, her father would definitely be in a tight spot without a doubt. He, on the other hand, had followed her into the hospital and caught her off guard. Now he was blaming her? Yun Xianxia averted her eyes and did not look at him. She pursed her lips as if she were sulking, but in the man's eyes, she looked a little childish and adorable. "Professor?" Pet. Chapter 284. "Little thing, why don't you tell me what I've taught you?" As he said that, he reached out and rubbed her chest heavily. He lowered his head and bit her lips, the tip of his tongue rubbing against her lips as he smiled devilishly. "Is it this?" He didn't teach her anything good, but he did teach her a lot of things that she shouldn't have learned. Yun Xianxia exclaimed and slapped his hand away forcefully. Her eyes were filled with anger. "What are you doing?" This was an elevator. It could stop at any time and people could come in. How could he be so brazen in the elevator? Didn't he know how to restrain himself? As she thought about it, Yun Xianxia felt ashamed and indignant. Her phone rang at the right time. She heaved a sigh of relief and hoped that the man would pick up the phone so that she could escape this disaster. However, Mu Yaja didn't seem to have any intention of letting her off. He even ignored the loud ringtone and took a step closer to her. His slender fingers brushed her face gently as he narrowed his eyes and carefully studied her face. Suddenly he sighed softly. What a seductive face! Look at those innocent and pure eyes with a hint of coquettishness. One look was enough to seduce one's soul. Mu Yaja lowered his head and lightly pecked the corner of her lips with an ambiguous smile. "Has anyone ever told you that you look like a vixen?" Yun Xianxia turned her head away. ignoring the man's provocation. He suddenly lowered his head and 2 warm breasts covered her. His large palm rubbed her waist unceremoniously and pinched it hard, causing her to groan in pain. Her lips and teeth were filled with his mellow scent, and there seemed to be a strong smell of smoke. His hot lips and tongue stole her breath and entered the gap between her lips. He gently nibbled on her small tongue and greedily sucked on it. She dodged uneasily and looked at the slightly darkened eyes. She raised her head and looked at the jumping floor numbers. She angrily pushed him away. This man. How dare he mess around in the elevator? They were about to reach the first floor. What if someone saw them? As he thought of this, his hand had unknowingly circled around her back, brushing past the scorching heat of his body as it probed into her skirt. Xianxia was so shocked that her beautiful face turned pale. She couldn't help but start to struggle. Her hands patted his shoulders, but she still couldn't stop his aggressive actions. She steeled her heart and fiercely bit his tongue. Amidst the dull pain, the 2 lips parted. Xianxia wiped her lips and glared at him. Wuxia, don't go too far. When he hugged you just now, the tender look on his face made her heart throb a little, and her impression of him changed. Who would have thought that at this moment, he would reveal his true colors? Wuxia's face froze for a second. Then, he raised his eyebrows dangerously and a trace of coldness appeared in his eyes. This woman actually bit him again? It was somewhat inconceivable, but more than that, he found it interesting. The girl in front of him, who clearly looked weak and fragile, was resisting him again and again. It seemed that no matter how docile a cat was, once it started to scratch, it would be quite fierce. One had to know that with his status and identity, many women would flock to him like a flock of ducks. They would even lower themselves to cater to him. However, this woman was extremely unwilling, and it ignited his desire to conquer her. Well, it was good that he spent more effort to train her. What he really enjoyed was the process of conquering. Chapter 285. The man's eyes were too scary. She simply lowered her head and stopped looking at him. In this suffocating panic, the elevator door slowly opened with a ding sound. Xianxia lifted her head as if she had been granted amnesty, but when she saw the woman standing outside the elevator, her heart plummeted. Her breath caught in her throat as she subconsciously pushed the man away and awkwardly tugged at the corner of her lips. Auntie? Xianxia was a little embarrassed. Her heart was in a mess. She didn't know how much she had seen in the elevator just now. She nervously intertwined her fingers and walked out of the elevator uneasily. She subconsciously looked at Wuxia. Unexpectedly, the man evilly wiped his lips and looked at her deeply. He whispered in her ear, "I'll wait for you outside." Then, he turned around and took out his phone to see the missed calls displayed on the screen. He then walked away. Xianxia was stunned. This man actually left just like that, leaving a mess for her to deal with? Xianxia was hesitating about what excuse to make up when she saw Yunlingru looking at Wuxia in surprise. Yunlingru said in surprise, "Xia, what were you doing just now?" Of course, she didn't see wrong. The moment the elevator door opened, her niece, who had always been well-behaved, was intimately close to that man. Boyfriend? That man just now was obviously a business elite who had stepped into society. She suddenly felt a little strange in her heart and secretly wondered what kind of ambiguous relationship they were having. Xianxia was stunned. For a moment, she didn't know how to explain. Her face flushed red and her head hung low. Yunlingru saw her guilty look and became even more suspicious. "Xia, don't tell me you're dating someone?" "No." Xianxia denied it immediately. Yunlingru pressed on, "Then who is that man? What were you doing in the elevator just now?" Xianxia bit her lip and stuttered as she tried to explain. However, she couldn't tell the truth. Pursing her lips, she said, He's my university professor." University professor? A professor hugging his student in an elevator. Yunlingru was even more confused. She stared straight at her. There was no doubt that the child in front of her was lying. Xianxia had been obedient since she was a child, so she wasn't good at lying. Yunlingru could tell that she was lying from her flustered eyes. "Xia, I didn't expect you to learn how to lie after entering society. English teacher? You can lie to your father, but you can lie to me. Is he really your university professor? Don't lie to me. Faced with Yun Lingru's aggression, Yun Shirshir could not back down. She gritted her teeth and insisted, He is my university professor. He came to the hospital to visit you today. Are you still not going to tell me the truth? Yun Lingru's voice was very deep. She seemed to be angry. Suddenly, she thought of something and asked coldly, I heard from your father that you haven't been home for a few days. Where have you been these few days? She paused and asked suspiciously, Did you fool around with that man? Shirshir, tell me, did you learn something bad and do something shameful? Chapter 286. Auntie, I have something to do now, so I'll leave first. I'll explain it to you next time. With that, she turned around and fled in a panic. Yun Lingru narrowed her eyes and frowned, her gaze sharp. This girl's words sounded suspicious no matter how she listened to them. However, she wasn't her child, so even if she did something out of line, she wouldn't mind. As long as she didn't bring shame to her family, it would be fine. She couldn't afford to lose face. With that thought, she stepped into the lift. Even after running out of the hospital, Yun Shirshir's heart still palpitated with fear. It was all because of this vile man who fooled around in the lift. Now that her auntie had seen it, she really didn't know how to smooth things over. A business car was parked by the roadside. The man sat in the car and seemed to have been waiting for a long time. He had already ordered his assistant to drive the sports car back. Yun Shirshir walked over gloomily. The chauffeur opened the car door for her, but she didn't get into the car. Wuxia sat elegantly in the back seat with his legs crossed lazily. His eyes were looking straight ahead and he didn't turn to look at her. His perfect and unruly side profile looked reserved and cold. His eyes were half-opened lazily, and his lips were cold. Many times, he was like an arrogant emperor, exuding an aura that made people subconsciously submit to him. Yun Shirshir was a little angry with him. How could this man do as he pleased? Did he not care about the occasion when he was in heat? Sperm rushing to the brain. With that thought, she couldn't help but blurt out what was in her mind. Just as she finished speaking, she reacted and bit her lip. She actually said it out loud. Wuxia glanced at her and his lips curled up playfully. What did you say? What did she say? She said that he was a sperm rushing to the brain. But she didn't dare to say it a second time. She sighed, bit her lip, and got into the carriage. Bang! The car door was shut tight. Yun Shirshir looked straight ahead and didn't dare to get too close to him. She leaned against the car door and looked at him carefully out of the corner of her eye. After a long silence, she suddenly said softly, Please send me home. I'll get some clothes for you. As soon as her voice fell, her arm was forcefully pulled by the man. Wuxia's long arm scooped her up and easily pulled her into his embrace. Yun Shirshir was startled. She struggled for a moment, and in the blink of an eye, she was already pulled into his embrace. In the spacious carriage, soft music drifted in the air. The man's eyes revealed a playful smile. He lifted his thin lips and said in a low and seductive voice, Little thing, you haven't answered me. What did you just say? In other words, there was no way for her to change the topic and dodge the question. Yun Shirshir closed her eyes and ignored her. Wuxia had plenty of ways to make her talk. Did you just say that he was overwhelmed by lust? Through her shirt, he pinched the softness in front of her chest. Like this. Yun Shirshir's body trembled slightly and her face instantly tensed up. Instinctively, she turned her head to look at the chauffeur, only to see that he had consciously turned away from the rearview mirror, as though he had turned a deaf ear to the scene in the back seat. A sense of foreboding arose in her heart. Yun Shirshir struggled uneasily, but the man held her waist tightly. His large palm pressed against her back and pressed her even closer to his chest. Their faces were intimately close, the tips of their noses touching, and their lips touching. Chapter 287. Such a close distance really made her feel uncomfortable. Looking at the devilishly handsome face so close, Yun Shirshir helplessly pushed against his chest. Wasn't this man just sitting there quietly? Why did he suddenly? There was someone else in the car. She looked away helplessly, but her chin was tightly gripped by his long fingers and she was forced to look at his face. She was forced to look at his face. Her eyes were narrowed in pain and they were faintly moist. Her soft red lips were sparkling and translucent, just like a delicious cherry. He fiercely captured her lips and sucked on them. That soft and sweet feeling was even better than what he had imagined. Once he kissed her, he couldn't stop. His body heated up and he greedily wanted more. He gently traced her cherry lips, and his right hand reached under her clothes, reaching for the beautiful area. He was in high spirits and he continued what he was doing in the lift. That's enough. Wuxia. Not enough. Xianxia flew into a rage out of humiliation. She struggled, and her body couldn't help but tremble. Her fair cheeks flushed red shyly, and she looked even more alluring. Wuxia looked at this pleasing scene. He had really misjudged this girl, and he had once compared her to a cat. Now that he thought about it, she was actually a beautiful and flirtatious poppy flower. One couldn't help but sink deeper and deeper, and become addicted to it. Xianxia was quite shocked by this sudden action. They were still in the car, and the chauffeur was still sitting in front. This man actually did such a thing in front of others. She was a little helpless, but more than that, she felt ashamed. She pushed his chest hard, but her weak strength was not worth mentioning to Wuxia. He only used one hand to bind her wrists. Let go of me. She panted softly and glared at him in annoyance. The man was unmoved. He pressed his lips tightly against hers, and he raised his eyebrows. Isn't this what you want from me? Xianxia sneered and glanced at him. What are you talking about? It's so weird. Wuxia's eyes flashed with ridicule. You're tempting me. Don't you want me to do this? His tone was devilish. The orchid's breath curled around her neck. He had always been a man who did things his own way. He never liked to restrict himself or suppress himself. However, he didn't really want to do her. With his strong possessiveness, how could he allow his woman to be coveted by other men? However, he felt that this woman's angry look was a little cute and charming. He liked to admire her posture. It was pleasing to the eye. Therefore, he had the intention to tease her. However, Xianxia really thought that this man was going to do her in the car. Xianxia glanced at the chauffeur behind her from the corner of her eye. This man is too pretentious. Seeing that his actions were becoming more and more insatiable, and that his large palm was actually reaching into her clothes, she flew into a rage out of humiliation. Gritting her teeth, she raised her hand. Slap! A crisp sound rang out. The man couldn't help but turn his face sideways. She pushed him away and sat back in her seat. Her face was full of anger. Wuxia's gaze froze, and he was in disbelief. Even the driver, who was sitting in the driver's seat, was stunned. He held his breath. He had seen a lot of stubborn women, but this was the first woman who dared to hit the Xiao. So powerful, the driver was in awe of her. Xianxia's beautiful eyes narrowed slightly. She said unhappily, I asked you to stop. Didn't you hear me clearly? Chapter 288. Xianxia was not the least bit intimidated by his deterrence. She met his gaze and coldly said, Chairman Mu, I'll have to trouble you to size up the situation. Unless you're a beast, even if you're in heat, you should pick a place, okay? You may not be embarrassed, but I am. This woman actually compared the president to a beast in heat. Actually, it was no wonder. After all, the president had been suppressing himself for a long time. He did not have a woman by his side, and his so-called fiancée was just a facade. He had been suppressing himself for a long time. The chauffeur could not help but laugh. However, when he caught a glimpse of the man's dangerous gaze through the rearview mirror, he was so frightened that he immediately shut up. Wuxia raised his eyebrows, and there was a murderous look in his eyes. Did you say I'm a beast? I said, is there something wrong with your understanding? Xianxia asked mockingly. Did I say you're a beast? What I said just now was that only beasts choose a time and place to be in heat. I wasn't referring to you in particular. Wuxia was taken aback by her words. Xianxia's words were impeccable, and he was speechless. This woman was really sharp-tongued. She did not say anything on the surface, but she insinuated that he was a beast. Even if he wanted to refute, there was nothing he could do. Chairman Mu, you're from a noble family. You must have received higher education. Don't you know the basic respect for others? Xianxia said angrily. If you don't know, why don't I teach you another lesson? The man raised his eyebrows unhappily. Are you educating me? The chauffeur could not help but laugh when he heard that. Wuxia could not take it anymore. He had nowhere to vent his anger after being snubbed by someone. Old Han. Yes, President. Why are you laughing? Which bastard is laughing? Old Han looked embarrassed. Am I laughing? I'm not laughing. Just now. Wuxia's voice was serene with hidden displeasure. President, I was in a daze just now. I didn't see or hear anything. Old Han was a smart man and immediately defended himself. Get lost. Wuxia said coldly. Old Han wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and quickly turned off the engine. At the same time, he raised the partition in the car to separate the driver's seat from the back seat. The car was closed, and the back seat was an enclosed space, isolated from the rest of the world. What are you doing? Xianxia watched as the chauffeur alighted from the car. From the corner of her eye, she could see the man's gloomy and terrifying expression. She pursed her lips and felt a little scared. Just now, she couldn't help but stretch out her hand and slap him. Now she was filled with regret. It seemed that she had angered him. She turned to open the car door, but the car was already locked. Without the central control to unlock it, the car door could not be opened. Behind her, Wuxia pulled her into his embrace with his long arms and asked coldly, "Are you satisfied now?" Now we are the only ones in the car. There are no outsiders. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. She said angrily, "Are you a beast?" You're right. I'm a beast. Wuxia inched closer to her and sniffed the shower gel on her neck. It was the same scent as his. He felt as if he was poisoned. He was poisoned by this woman, and there was no antidote. It was not enough. It was not enough. He had never desired a woman so much. It was like he was poisoned. No one could cure him. Seeing the man getting closer, Xianxia's body tensed up. She pushed his chest and said angrily, "No, I don't like it in the car." Chapter 289. Enough. Before she could finish her sentence, her phone started ringing again as if it was her last resort. Wuxia frowned unhappily and picked up the phone. Xianxia glanced at it curiously. The name, Mu Wanru, was like a needle pricking her eyes. Her heart felt strangely congested. Mu Wanru was this man's fiancé? Just as she was feeling embarrassed and annoyed, she suddenly realized what was going on. Could it be that they didn't have a good relationship? She had never seen a couple in love leave a full name in their contact information on their phones. It was cold and indifferent. There wasn't even a pet name. Those 3 words were cold and emotionless, as if there was no emotion behind them. On second thought, she raised her eyebrows. Simple and clear. That was this man's usual style. Maybe they had a good relationship. Why should she worry about it? But as he thought of this, a sense of shame arose in his heart. She felt that she was a third party. Xianxia suddenly felt very uncomfortable. She wanted to defend herself, but she couldn't. Wasn't that right? What was the difference between her and those women who interfered in other people's marriages? Was she the woman she bumped into the other time? Xianxia's gaze deepened. She felt that something was wrong. She didn't know why, but this woman gave her a sense of déjà vu. Her eyes were so familiar. In her dusty memory, it was as if an indelible mark had been engraved. Somehow, it was as if some memory was breaking out of its cocoon. Her head hurt. Wuxia hung up the phone and didn't pick it up. From the corner of his eye, he saw that she was deep in thought. His handsome eyes deepened. Rose Manor. In front of the bright floor-to-ceiling windows, Mu Wanru was in her pajamas. She held her phone tightly. Her expression was distorted due to anger. He wasn't picking up the phone. 3 consecutive calls were cut off. What was going on? She turned around and walked to the dining table. There was a thick stack of newspapers on the table. The headlines of the newspapers were all about Tang Yu having an affair with Huan Yu's top management. The pictures and text were very eye-catching. Mu Wanru picked up one of them and skimmed through it. Looking at the dazzling title, her knuckles stiffened. Alan, you useless piece of trash. He didn't do his job well and even messed up a small task that was given to him? She trusted him so much, but he couldn't even do such a simple thing? She had thought that she could sit back and wait for Xianxia's scandal to be exposed, but now she had fallen into an irrecoverable situation. At that time, even Huan Yu would not be able to protect her, let alone Lin Fengtian. For a female celebrity, it was a huge scandal to be exposed. She would definitely be banned from the industry. Who knew that the person who was exposed the next day would be Tang Yu? This was strange. Why Tang Yu? Alan assured her again and again that the whole thing had been arranged properly. His subordinates had personally sent Xianxia to the car. How did things turn out like this in the end? Could it be that Xianxia could turn into a living person? This was simply a fantasy. Mu Wanru was angry and frustrated. At the same time, she found it inconceivable. She had an ominous premonition that there was something fishy going on. The servants served breakfast to the table one after another. Mu Sheng slowly walked down the stairs with the help of the nanny. Mu Wanru immediately crushed the newspapers and threw them into the trash can. She went up to him with a smile and took the old man from the nanny. Carefully supporting him, she said sweetly, "Grandpa, good morning." Chapter 290. Mu Wanru helped him to sit at the table. Grandpa Mu sat up straight, lifted his chin, and scanned the dining room. Suddenly he asked, "That lad didn't come home last night?" At the mention of this, Mu Wanru looked worried. She said helplessly, "Yes, he didn't come back. I don't know where he went. Maybe he's busy at the office." "The office works at night?" Grandpa Mu sneered, expressing his displeasure. "I think that lad's wings have hardened and his heart has become wild. He doesn't even know how to return home. Wanru, you should discipline him." "Grandpa, how can I discipline him?" Mu Wanru pouted and acted coquettishly. She sat down on the chair beside Mu Sheng and said sadly, "Grandpa, he doesn't listen to my advice at all. Ever since he was young, he didn't listen to anyone other than you. I asked him to come home earlier, but he didn't come back last night. This isn't the first time. He wasn't like this in the past, though." Mu Sheng nodded in agreement. This child had always been cold and indifferent. He would never get into trouble outside. He was different from other playboys who liked to flirt with countless women. This child would never mess around. This was something he had always acknowledged. In Grandpa Mu's heart, Mu Yazhe was a responsible father. He would come home every night to have dinner with Xiaoyichen. No matter how busy he was with work, he would never miss it. However, his abnormality these few days made Grandpa Mu especially concerned. Seeing his slightly darkened expression, Mu Wanru continued to whisper in his ear, "Grandpa, he's a man. Do you think he has other women outside? He dares." Grandpa Mu was so angry when he heard this that he blew his beard and glared at her. He slammed his palm on the table, causing some of the tea to splash out. The servants behind him were so shocked that they did not dare to breathe loudly. Mu Wanru was elated to see this. Mu Sheng had always been on her side. This time he must stand up for her. "Lass, don't worry. If he's unfaithful to you and messes around outside, Grandpa will definitely stand up for you and break his legs." Grandpa Mu looked at her lovingly. When he got angry, the cane in his hand hit the ground heavily. Mu Wanru pursed her lips and looked at him pitifully. "Grandpa, don't be sad, I won't let him down." With that, he patted the back of her hand affectionately. Don't worry." Seeing that Grandpa Mu was going to stand up for her, she was even happier. So, she pretended to be distressed and said, "Grandpa, don't do that. If you break his leg, my heart will ache and so will Grandpa. You spoil him the most. If you don't take care of a man and set some rules for him, his heart will be wild sooner or later." Mu Sheng was quite knowledgeable about this. When he was young, Grandpa Mu was also a playboy. He had married 3 wives and he had attracted a lot of love affairs. Mu Wanru faintly said, "Grandpa, do you still remember the girl who was my surrogate 6 years ago?" Mu Sheng's eyes darkened. That girl was chosen by him. She was very delicate and pretty, with outstanding features and an aura of purity. What was more commendable was that her eyes were very similar to that woman's. Too similar? It was as if she was a carbon copy. Hence, Mu Sheng took a liking to her at first glance. Mu Wanru continued, I think that woman's background is not simple. Chapter 291. Grandpa Mu's eyebrows twitched and he quickly asked, What do you mean? This woman is quite ambitious and scheming. I don't know how she managed to sneak into Huan Yu's cocktail party. Not only did she deliberately show off in front of Zhe, but she also tried to find opportunities to get close to Xiao Yichen. What do you think? Is she trying to use her son to climb up the social ladder? Mu Wanru's eyes were filled with sadness as she spoke. Xiao Yichen has never been close to me since we were young. I'm worried that she's plotting something to drive a wedge between me and my son. Grandpa, please be reasonable. Don't you think she's too much? Mu Wanru recalled the intimate scene between Xianxia and Mu Yazhe on the dance floor on the day of the cocktail party. She felt a stab of pain in her heart. An actress. Grandpa Mu snorted coldly. He was a rather old-fashioned person. He had never liked the people in the entertainment industry, especially those female celebrities. He always felt that they were scheming and came from unknown backgrounds. None of them were good people. Among the rich and powerful, the celebrities in the entertainment industry were the ones who were looked down upon the most. Although the celebrities were very popular nowadays, in the eyes of the older generation of aristocrats, they were just mediocre actresses. Since ancient times, there was a saying that a prostitute was heartless and an actor was heartless. Therefore, it was not a prejudice. It was just that the rich and powerful looked down on the people in the entertainment industry. Mu Wanru gritted her teeth and nodded. Yes. I don't know how she managed to sneak into the entertainment industry. Do you think she did it on purpose? If that brat dares to bring an actress with an unknown background into the Mu family, he can try. Grandpa Mu was so angry that his lips were trembling. He knocked on his walking stick and scolded, I can't stand those lowly actresses. Moreover, the contract clearly states that she can't cause any trouble for the child's custody. Otherwise, she'll have to bear the consequences. If she insists, she'll burn herself. Mu Wanru was secretly happy when she heard that. However, she pretended to be helpless and said, But what if she protects her? Grandpa, do you know that some women are born to be seductive? They are born to seduce men. How dare he? Why wouldn't he dare? Mu Wanru pouted and said, He hasn't been home for the past 2 days. He must be with that woman. Grandpa, you have to help me. What? Mu Sheng's eyes widened in fury. I'll teach him a good lesson when he comes back. Don't be sad. Grandfather will uphold justice for you. Yes. Mu Wanru nodded happily. Although Grandpa Mu was already in his 60s, he was still a man who had been involved in bloody battles when he was young. His methods were ruthless. If she were to borrow his means to get rid of Xianxia, this thorn in her side, she wouldn't need to do anything. Old Master Mu was obviously still angry. He lifted his chin and looked around before asking with a strange expression, Where's Yichen? Mu Wanru immediately asked the nanny behind her, Where's the young master? Young master is doing his morning exercise at the archery range. Go call him over for breakfast. Mu Wanru sat down and carefully reached out to caress the old man's chest. She coquettishly said, Grandpa, don't be angry. Why are you angry over such a slut? Chapter 292. The villa was located in the southwest corner of the mansion. It was a huge indoor shooting range. Mu Yazhe had always been willing to invest a lot of effort into Xiao Yichen. When Xiao Yichen had just learned how to walk, Mu Yazhe had sent him to the special training camp to observe the soldiers' special training. When he was young, Grandpa Mu had also trained him in the same way. Every summer, he would send him to the special training camp to undergo special training. Under Mu Yazhe's influence, Xiao Yichen had developed a strong interest in firearms and combat at a young age. When he was 2 years old and the other children were still learning how to speak, Xiao Yichen was already holding a pacifier in his mouth. He could skillfully assemble and load all kinds of firearms and ammunition. When he was 3 years old, he could even load and shoot skillfully. Even Grandpa Mu could not help but click his tongue in amazement. Children of the same age as Xiao Yichen might still be learning how to speak. Those who were talented liked to draw on white paper and were still obsessed with interesting toys. However, Xiao Yichen seemed to have inherited Mu Yaja's iron-blooded genes. He did not like to play with words and ink. Instead, he was obsessed with combat and firearms. When he was 5 years old, he officially entered the military camp. Not only did he not complain about the heavy training, but he was also very excited about it. Grandpa Mu was in awe. Not only was this child not inferior to Mu Yaja when he was young, but he had even surpassed him in terms of maturity. The villa was not only equipped with a fencing hall, but it was also equipped with an archery hall, a shooting range, and a combat arena. All of these were prepared for Xiao Yichen. At the same time, in the archery hall, it was quiet. It was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop on the ground. Xiao Yichen was wearing a smart and neat protective suit. He stood upright and held a heavy bow in his hand. He held his breath and focused on aiming at the target 100 meters away. His fingers pulled the bowstring. Swoosh! The arrow that was released from the bowstring seemed to have the power of a thunderbolt. It was like an arrow made of sparks. It was shot in an instant and accurately hit the bullseye. Young master, behind him, the nanny who had rushed over had been waiting for a long time. Seeing him put down the bow, she said softly, "Master and young madam want you to have breakfast." Xiao Yichen acted as if he hadn't heard anything. He turned around with a cold expression and took off his equipment expressionlessly. Suddenly, he thought of something and turned around to ask, "Did Daddy come back last night?" Young master didn't come back last night." Xiao Yichen furrowed his brows slightly, and there was a hint of loneliness in his eyes. After a moment of silence, he picked up the towel handed to him by a servant and wiped the sweat off his face. "I'm not going. Tell Grandpa and Mommy that I have no appetite." His cold words revealed that he was somewhat disappointed at the moment. The nanny said with a worried face, "Young master, if you don't go eat breakfast, Master will be worried. Skipping breakfast isn't good for your health." "Then prepare a copy for me and send it to my study," Xiao Yichen said coldly and walked out of the archery range. Behind him, the nanny looked at his cold figure and sighed softly. The father and son were exactly the same in terms of temperament. Chapter 293. When she opened the door, the apartment was cold and empty. Mu Yaja followed behind her. The moment he stepped into the extremely small space, a look of disdain appeared on his face out of displeasure. This apartment was too small. To Xianxia and Yu, this apartment was extremely spacious. Compared to the second-hand apartment that Papa Yun had bought previously, this apartment had 2 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bedroom, 1 study, and a 10-square-meter living room. It could be said that this apartment was very comfortable for them to live in. However, to Mu Yaja, who was nearly 1.9 meters tall, this place seemed especially cramped. Standing in such a small space with his hands and feet tied, he felt extremely restrained. Xianxia rushed into the room and hurriedly prepared a change of clothes for Yu. The material of the hospital gown was coarse, and the child's skin was soft and sensitive. Sleeping in the hospital gown was really unsettling. Although Yu did not mention it, Xianxia was attentive. With one glance, she saw the red rash on his wrist due to his sensitive body. Her heart ached terribly. Although the clothes that she bought for Yu were not expensive, she had specially selected the best quality. Yu had a weak body, so she was very careful about everything, no matter how big or small. During this time, Mu Yaja had some free time, so he curiously took a look around the small apartment. After entering, there was a bathroom that was as small as a fish tank on the left. Mu Yaja frowned as he walked in. His head almost bumped into the door frame. It was too small. The space of 7 to 8 square meters was stuffed with an old automatic washing machine, a toilet bowl, and a sink. When he walked in, he accidentally bumped his knee into the washing machine. The man frowned slightly. He was extremely displeased and was even more disgusted. The bathroom was described as smaller than a fish tank because there was a wall-mounted aquarium outside the living room of the Mu residence. Just the aquarium alone was 5 to 6 meters long, so it was indeed much bigger than this bathroom. A human is inferior to a fish? Mu Yaja walked into the kitchen again. The first thing he saw was 2 little bare aprons hanging on the barbs. One big and one small. It looked very warm. There was a duty list on the door. He glanced at it. There were 7 days in a week. Yu was responsible for 5 days of meals, and Xianxia was responsible for 3 meals on weekends. The man smiled and could not help but find it interesting. It turned out that this Xiaobao knew how to cook. A 6-year-old child actually knows how to do housework. I wonder how good her skills are? In the south, there were 2 rooms side by side. One of them was a study. Mu Yaja was a little taken aback when he walked in. There was a fax machine, a printer, a mahogany desk, a high-end computer, and a locked safe on the desk. Other than that, there was a pencil case and a thick stack of blueprints. Everything was neatly organized. What he did not know was that everything in the study was arranged by Xianxia according to Yun Tianyou's blueprints. It looked like a small office. Usually, Yu was the only one taking care of it, and Xianxia never interfered. Mu Yaja glanced at the blueprints on the table and picked them up curiously. He could not help being stunned when he glanced at them. This thick stack of blueprints was actually a toy blueprint. The drawing was exquisite and meticulous. Be it the design or concept, it was ingenious. Such a design draft was clearly from an excellent and professional designer. Chapter 294. Mu Yaja. The man raised his head. At the door of the study, Xianxia was carrying a pile of heavy laundry. Seeing the design drawings in his hands, she warned him sternly, "Don't touch anything in this study, or else you will be angry." This study was Yu's little world. Usually, Xianxia would come in to clean it, but she would not touch anything in the study. Mu Yaja put down the drawings and walked out of the study. Looking from the corner of his eye, he strode into the bedroom as if he had discovered a new continent. Xianxia, who was standing at the side, had cold lines on her forehead. This was akin to a wealthy aristocrat visiting a slum. She did not think much of it, though. Carrying the clothes into the bathroom, she planned to wash them while she was here. Mu Yaja then took a tour of the bedroom. At the entrance, there was a double bed. The light blue bedding and sheets gave off a sense of childlike innocence and warmth. Yu liked the color blue, but she also liked simplicity. Hence, there were not many patterns on the sheets. It was very simple. The bedside table was filled with all kinds of books. He casually picked up a few. There were novels, fables, comic books, and fairy tales. It was as if he had finally found a trace of a child's innocence here. He slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. The scene of Yun Tianyu leaning against the headboard and lazily flipping through the comic books surfaced in his mind. These books were recommended to parents by the school. Xianxia specially bought a few sets from the bookstore and placed them on the bedside table. Every night before bed, she would hug Yun Tianyu and gently tell him the stories from the comic books. Usually, Yun Tianyu was uninterested in these children's comics and books. He always found them boring, but he liked listening to his mommy tell him stories. Xianxia's voice was very gentle. It was soft and sweet, just like a Jiangnan woman's. Listening to her sweet voice in his dreams was the happiest thing in Yun Tianyou's heart. In the narrow space, there was a strong atmosphere of life, as well as a tranquil little warmth. Although the room was a little small and the double bed was not spacious enough, Mu Yaja lay down with his arms as a pillow. He could not even stretch his limbs freely. However, on the blanket, there was the unique milky fragrance of a child, as well as the unique fresh body fragrance of Xianxia. This fragrance was tranquil and gentle. It wasn't overbearing, but it was refreshing. Mu Yaja felt a moment of peace in his heart. When Xianxia walked into the bedroom again, the man was lying on the bed, deeply asleep. She couldn't help but smile. She still remembered that a certain man had said that she had more energy than others. Xianxia quietly walked to the bedside, squatted down, and looked at the man's exquisite sleeping face closely. The man in deep sleep had his eyes gently closed. The dim light engraved a thin layer of shadow on his angular facial features. His long, narrow eyes and thick, black eyelashes were beautiful and charming. Xianxia raised her eyebrows in surprise. She remembered that when Yu was born, he had a head of thick, black hair. When his eyes were closed, his eyelashes were fine and dense, even thicker than hers. It turned out that he had inherited this man's genes. He had a high nose bridge and a beautiful curve. He was like a sculpture that had been carved with the finest craftsmanship.